Hello story enthusiasts. Welcome to Super Harry. Today we venture into, what if Gringotts healer found 3,100 stolen inheritances at age 6 and Dumbledore fled Britain. Your support means everything, like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1, The Welfare Flag. The flag had been sitting in Mira Goldthorne's inbox for 11 days before she got to it. That wasn't unusual. Gringotts generated thousands of welfare flags every month, dormant accounts, unclaimed inheritances, minors listed as beneficiaries with no active guardian verification on file. Most of them resolved themselves. A solicitor would check in, a distant aunt would surface, a vault would transfer quietly to a new name and the flag would close green. Myra's job was to follow up on the ones that didn't close on their own, which meant she spent most of her professional life in the gray zones, the accounts that couldn't be neatly filed, the beneficiaries who'd slipped through every institutional crack there was. She was good at her job. She was also, by her own admission, perpetually behind on paperwork. But this particular flag was different from the others, and she'd known it the moment she'd actually read it rather than skimming the header. The flag hadn't been generated by a single account irregularity. It had been generated by the inheritance tracking charm embedded in every Gringotts contract since 1822, a charm that monitored inheritance flows across linked accounts and fired an alert when money moved in patterns that didn't match the documented will of the deceased. The charm had fired 3,100 times in the past 5 years, all pointing to the same destination. One vault. One beneficiary. One name that Mira recognized immediately, because everyone in Britain recognized it. Harry James Potter. She'd pulled the full audit that same evening, sitting in her office on the 14th sublevel of Gringotts with a cold cup of tea going stale at her elbow and the light from her lamp throwing long shadows across 6 inches of parchment. She'd read it twice. Then she'd gone upstairs and knocked on Ragnar's door, which was something junior healers simply did not do, and she'd told him what she'd found. Ragnar had read the audit in silence. Then he'd looked up at her with those flat, ancient eyes and said, "Find the child." So here she was. Number 4, Privet Drive, Little Whinging, Surrey. It was a Tuesday morning in late July, and the street was aggressively normal, identical houses sitting in identical rows, identical squares of lawn, a few cars gleaming in the sun. The kind of neighborhood that worked very hard at having nothing interesting happen in it. Mira stood at the end of the garden path and looked at the house. It looked exactly like every other house on the street. There was a car in the drive. Curtains were open. Someone had planted petunias along the front border with military precision. She was wearing her Gringotts credentials on a chain around her neck, a flat disc of engraved gold that served as both identification and legal authority. As a welfare healer operating under the Goblin-Human Accords of 1871, she had the right to request access to any property where a minor beneficiary of a Gringotts account resided. She also had the right to conduct a health assessment without prior notice. She had used both rights before. Neither of them made knocking on strangers' doors feel any less uncomfortable. She knocked. The woman who answered the door had a long neck and a sharp, suspicious face, the kind of face that had decided things about people before they'd finished speaking. She looked at Mira, at the dark skin, the slightly too sharp features that hinted at her goblin heritage, the gold disc and the leather satchel, and her expression went flat and unwelcoming in a way that wasn't quite rude but was working up to it. "Yes. Petunia Desley." Mira kept her voice pleasant. "My name is Mira Goldthorne. I'm a welfare healer with Gringotts Bank. I'm here regarding Harry Potter, who is listed as residing at this address and is a beneficiary of several Gringotts accounts. I'd like to speak with him and conduct a brief health assessment. This is a standard welfare visit, it's covered under the Goblin-Human Accords, so you'll find everything above board." She smiled and held up the gold disc. "May I come in?" The woman's jaw tightened. "He's fine." "I'm sure he is," Mira said. "But I do need to see him myself." "It's a legal requirement, Mrs. Dursley." "Not optional, I'm afraid." There was a pause that was a few seconds too long. Then Petunia Desley stepped back from the door. The house was immaculate. That was the first thing Mira registered: obsessively, aggressively tidy, everything in its right place, a kind of cleanliness that felt more like control than care. There were photographs on the wall. A large blonde man, a large blonde boy at various ages, and Petunia herself. The kind of family portrait that looked like it had been staged until it looked spontaneous. Harry Potter was not in any of the photographs. "He's in the garden," Petunia said, her voice clipped. "I'll get him." "That's all right," Mira said, already moving through the kitchen toward the glass door at the back. "I'll go to him." The garden was large and well kept. There were flower beds along the fences, a mowed lawn, and a shed at the far end. Mira stepped out onto the patio and looked around. She found him almost immediately, because once she'd registered what she was looking at, she couldn't stop. He was sitting at the base of the shed, in the narrow strip of shadow between the structure and the fence, half hidden by a rose bush that clearly hadn't been planted to provide shade or privacy but was doing both anyway. He was small, very small, even accounting for the fact that he was 6 years old. He was wearing clothes that were several sizes too large, a gray t-shirt with a stretched collar and jeans that had been rolled up multiple times at the ankles. His dark hair was enormous relative to the rest of him, a wild cloud that probably hadn't been combed in days. He had his knees pulled up to his chest and he was reading, or trying to read, because the book in his hands was clearly not his, was too big and too adult for a 6-year-old, and he was squinting at it with the concentration of someone who'd learned to focus very hard on the things directly in front of them. He had a bruise on his left forearm. Mira noticed it the way she always noticed these things, clinically first, emotionally a half-second later. He looked up when he heard her footsteps on the grass. His eyes, behind round glasses that were bent slightly out of shape at one hinge, were a very startling shade of green. He did not startle the way most children startled when a stranger appeared in their garden. He just looked at her with that careful, measuring gaze, the kind of look that belonged on someone much older, and waited to see what she would do. "Hello," Mira said. She stopped about 6 feet away, crouched down so she wasn't looming, and put her satchel on the ground beside her. "I'm Mira. I'm a healer. I work for Gringotts Bank." Something shifted in his expression. Not fear. Something more like assessment. "The Goblin Bank," he said. "That's the one." He considered that. "Aunt Petunia let you in?" "She did." He glanced toward the house. Petunia was visible through the glass door, watching them with her arms crossed. The boy tracked her for a moment and then looked back at Mira with an expression that was, she thought, quietly resigned. "Are you here because of my parents' money?" he asked. Mira blinked. "What makes you ask that?" "Because nothing else about me has anything to do with a bank." He said it without self-pity, just stating a fact. "And I heard Uncle Vernon on the phone last year saying something about a trust fund." He was angry about it. 6 years old, she thought. 6 years old and already reading the room. "Something like that," she said. "Can I sit with you for a bit? I need to ask you some questions and have a look at how you're doing." He looked at the patch of ground beside him, clearly evaluating whether it was a reasonable offer. Then he shifted slightly to make room. Mira sat on the grass. This close, the bruise on his arm was clearer, a week old, maybe, yellowing at the edges. She could also see that his wrists were thin in a way that had nothing to do with natural build. There was a small scar along his hairline that wasn't a famous lightning bolt. The glasses were held together at the hinge with a twist of wire. She opened her satchel and took out a diagnostic scroll, Gringotts Standard Issue, designed to assess the physical health of minor beneficiaries as part of welfare checks. She unrolled it and set it between them. "This is going to float up and sort of hover around you for a moment," she told him. "It doesn't hurt. It just reads your health like a photograph. Is that all right?" He looked at the scroll with transparent curiosity. "Does it use magic?" "It does." "Good," he said, like that settled something. He held still while the scroll animated, lifted off the grass, and began its quiet rotation around his small body. She watched his face while the scroll worked. He watched the scroll, fascinated, following its movement with those green eyes. When it settled back into her hands and she looked at the readings, she kept her expression very, very neutral through the process of reading them. Mild malnutrition. Corrected broken finger, 2 fingers, actually, healed crooked, which meant they'd been broken and left to mend on their own without medical attention. The bruise on the arm was consistent with a hand grip. His vision was significantly worse than it should have been for a child his age, made worse by the bent glasses. A suppression, and this was what stopped her breath for a moment, a magical suppression. Not accidental. Not natural. A deliberate, structured enchantment embedded in the wards of the house itself, designed to dampen a magical child's core. She'd seen accidental suppression before. Muggle homes sometimes generated it unintentionally through proximity to iron plumbing and certain building materials. This wasn't that. This was engineered. "You doing all right?" she asked him, keeping her voice easy. "I'm fine," he said, the way children said it when fine had long since stopped meaning anything. "How's the food situation here?" He was quiet for a second. "There's food. But not always enough." He picked at a thread on his jeans. "I eat when I do my chores. Mostly." Mira put the diagnostic scroll back in her satchel, sat back, and looked at him directly. "Harry. I need to be honest with you about why I'm here, because I think you're someone who'd rather hear the truth than a version of it." He met her gaze. "Okay. Gringotts noticed something wrong with your accounts. Your parents left you money, quite a lot of it. But the bank also noticed that other money, from other people, has been moving into accounts connected to your name without your knowledge or permission. The bank's job is to make sure the people who hold accounts are being looked after, especially when those people are children. So they sent me to check on you." She paused. "And I have to tell you that what I've found here, this house, these readings, the way you're living, none of it is acceptable. None of it is what should be happening to you." He was very still. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm going to do my job," she said. "Which includes making sure you're somewhere safe while the bank sorts out what happened to your accounts. You don't have to stay here." The stillness broke. Not into relief, into something more complicated, a tightening around his eyes that was half hope and half deep, learned skepticism about things that seemed too good. "They're my family," he said, with no particular emotion attached to it. "They are," Mira said. "But family isn't the same as safe." He looked at the house again. At Petunia's watching shadow behind the glass. Something moved behind his expression, something she couldn't quite read, something that wasn't grief and wasn't relief but was its own specific 6-year-old thing, the weight of already knowing. "Can I bring the book?" he asked. "Whose book is it?" "Dudley's." "But he doesn't read it. He uses it to stand on when he wants to reach the high shelf." "Leave it," Mira said. "Gringotts has better ones." He nodded and stood up, brushing grass off his oversized jeans with a kind of automatic efficiency that hurt to watch. The conversation with Petunia Desley lasted 18 minutes and was one of the more instructive 18 minutes of Myra's professional life. It was not a shouting match. Mira didn't do shouting matches. It was a careful, precise exchange in which Mira laid out, in plain language, what her diagnostic scroll had found, what Gringotts' legal authority was under the Accords, and what the consequences of obstruction would be. Petunia had started by insisting Harry was fine, moved to insisting the bruises were from normal childhood play, and arrived, somewhere around minute 12, at a version of the truth, that the boy was difficult, that he made strange things happen, that they'd done what they could with an abnormal child who'd been dumped on their doorstep without warning or consent. That last part was interesting. Mira filed it and moved on. Vernon Desley came home at minute 15. He was a large, red-faced man who filled the hallway and immediately started talking over her. She let him talk for about 45 seconds and then showed him the accord's documentation and the specific clause that allowed Gringotts to remove a minor beneficiary from an unsafe living situation into bank custody while an investigation was conducted. Bank custody, he said, like the words tasted wrong. He'll be perfectly safe, she said. You'll be contacted by Gringotts Legal within 48 hours. If you have questions, direct them there. Harry was sitting in the kitchen with a small canvas bag that held, as far as Mira could tell, a change of clothes, a photograph of two people she recognized as James and Lily Potter, and a stick that was very obviously a wand, or trying to be, the magic in it restless and untuned, the way a wand felt when it had been chosen by someone too young or when the wood was wrong for the wizard. She'd deal with that later. He looked up when she came back in, and she could see him doing the calculation. Is this real? Is it going to last? Should I believe it? Ready? She said. Yes, he said. Vernon made one more attempt, planting himself in the kitchen doorway. You can't just take him. There are rules. I've shown you the rules, Mira said pleasantly. They support me taking him. Have a good afternoon, Mr. Dursley. She put her hand on Harry's shoulder and steered him toward the front door. They were halfway down the garden path when Harry said, without looking back, she's going to be relieved. Who? Aunt Petunia. He said it with no bitterness. Just observing. She never wanted me here. Mira didn't know what to say to that, so she didn't say anything. She just kept her hand on his shoulder as they walked to the end of the street, where a Gringotts transport, a plain black carriage that Muggles would register as a large car, was waiting. You've never been to Gringotts? She asked, once they were inside and moving. No. He was looking out the window at the retreating street with an expression she couldn't read. What's it like? It's underground, mostly. Big halls. Very dramatic, goblins like dramatic architecture. She watched him. You'll be given your own rooms. Proper meals. I'll start on your medical assessments tomorrow. Get those fingers looked at properly, sort out your glasses. She paused. There are also going to be people who want to talk to you about the accounts. You don't have to understand everything right away. But I think you should know that what we found, it's significant. How significant? She looked at him. 6 years old. Malnourished and sharp-eyed and already braced for the next bad thing. Very, she said. But not bad significant. The money is still there. It's all accounted for. What we found is, it's more about what should have been yours and wasn't. What was taken and redirected. He turned from the window. Taken by who? That's what the bank is working out, she said carefully. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she had the distinct, unsettling feeling that he already suspected the answer was more complicated than she was letting on. Then he nodded, once, and turned back to the window. They arrived at Gringotts through the service entrance on Nocturne Alley, not the grand marble steps on Diagon Alley, but a side door that opened with a complex series of taps and led through a narrow stone corridor into the bank's lower levels. Harry took it all in with the focused calm of a child who had learned to observe carefully and react slowly, his green eyes moving from the torchlit walls to the distant sounds of the deeper vaults to the goblins they passed in the corridors, who glanced at him with expressions that ranged from carefully neutral to something that might have been, in goblin terms, significant interest. Word had moved fast. It always did in Gringotts. She'd prepared rooms for him in the healer's ward, a suite normally used for adult clients recovering from curse damage, but it had a sitting room and a proper bedroom and a window that, through a complicated enchantment, looked out on a view of the Scottish Highlands even though they were 60 feet underground. She'd had the kitchen send food. Real food, not vault standard provisions, bread and soup and fruit and things that could be eaten slowly by a small person whose stomach had learned to expect very little. Harry sat at the table and ate with the focused intensity of someone who knew better than to rush, because rushing suggested you didn't believe there would be more. She recognized that. She'd seen it before. The rooms are mine? He asked, between the bread and the soup. For now, she said. While the investigation runs. What happens after? Depends on the investigation. She sat across from him and poured herself tea. Harry, there are going to be people coming to speak with you over the next few days. Important people, from the bank and possibly from the government. I'm going to be there for all of it, all right? You don't have to talk to anyone alone. He considered that, then, do I have to be polite to them? She raised an eyebrow. Why do you ask? Because, he said, with 6-year-old precision, if they did something wrong, I don't want to have to pretend they didn't. She looked at him for a moment and then said, quite honestly, no. You don't have to pretend anything. He went back to his soup. Good. Later, after he'd eaten and she'd shown him the bedroom and the enchanted window and told him the view changed based on the weather above, which made his eyes go wide in a way that was purely, delightfully 6, she sat in the corridor outside his door and wrote up her report. She wrote it carefully. She wrote it completely. She included everything the diagnostic scroll had found, every physical irregularity, every sign of sustained neglect, the deliberate nature of the magical suppression. She wrote it with the flat, precise language of official documentation, because language like that made people pay attention in ways that emotional language didn't. Then she pulled out a separate sheet and wrote a private note to Ragnarok. It's worse than the audit suggested. The suppression alone should trigger a criminal complaint. The child is bright, stable, and has no illusions about his situation. He already knows something is wrong with the accounts and he's already forming questions about who's responsible. He asked me if he has to be polite to people who did something wrong. I told him no. I think you should meet him soon. She sealed the note, sent it through the internal courier system, and went to finish her tea. Ragnarok the Elder arrived the following morning, which was fast by Goblin administrative standards and which meant, Mira understood, that he considered this urgent. He was old, ancient, in the way that goblins who'd spent centuries managing the wealth of empires were ancient, with grey skin and white hair and eyes that were so dark they absorbed light rather than reflected it. He wore the formal robes of the Director of Inheritance Claims, which was the equivalent of a goblin warlord wearing full battle regalia, and he moved through the healer's ward with the quiet authority of someone who owned the building. Which, technically, he did. Harry was at the table with the remains of breakfast, porridge and eggs, and a book Mira had found in the healer's library. He looked up when Ragnarok entered, and he did not flinch. He looked at the old goblin with that steady, measuring gaze and waited. Ragnarok stopped a few feet away, looked at Harry in silence for a long moment, and then said, in a voice that had the texture of old stone, "You are James Potter's son." "Yes," Harry said. "And Lily Evans's." "Yes." Ragnarok sat down across from him, uninvited, which was a significant thing for a goblin of his rank to do. It meant he'd decided the child was worth the gesture. "I knew your grandfather. Fremont Potter. He kept his accounts in order. Paid his debts. Respected his obligations." He paused. "I liked him. I do not like many people." Harry appeared to consider this. "What happened to his money?" Ragnarok placed both hands flat on the table. "That is what I have come to tell you." He looked at Mira, who took her cue and closed the door, and then he spread out the audit, the real one, the full one, not the summary, on the table between them. He didn't condescend. That was what Mira watched for. Some adults, when explaining complex things to children, sanded down the edges and wrapped everything in softening language, and the child always knew it, always felt it, always learned from it that adults didn't think they could handle the truth. Ragnarok didn't do that. He placed the document on the table and began to talk. 3,100 families, he said. That is how many accounts had money redirected into trusts connected to your name over the past 5 years. Most of these families are not wealthy. Some of them are. All of them had inheritances, small ones, in some cases, the kind passed down through generations, the kind that paid for a child's schooling or a family's first home, that were rerouted through a series of proxy accounts before arriving in a vault structure registered under your name. Harry looked at the audit. He couldn't read all of it, some of it was in the cramped, formal notation of Gringotts accountancy, but he was clearly reading what he could. "That's stealing," he said. "Yes," Ragnar said. "It is. From me. From those families, and through your name, yes. The money was never actually yours. It was held in your name without your knowledge or consent as a way of obscuring its origin. Whoever structured the scheme understood that auditing a minor beneficiary account was more complicated than auditing a standard vault. That the protections around a minor heir would add layers of legal complexity that would slow any investigation." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Whoever. Do you know who it was?" Ragnar looked at him. "We have a clear picture of the account structure. The proxy trusts were established through a solicitor's office in Diagon Alley that closed in 1984. The authorizing signatures on the original documents matched the known signature of one individual who also, as it happens, placed you in the care of your aunt and uncle without a formal guardianship filing, without a will review, and without the knowledge of this bank." "Who is it?" Ragnar said the name plainly, because that was what the child had asked for. "Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore." Harry said nothing for a moment. Then, "The headmaster of the school." "Former headmaster, as of this morning," Ragnar said. "Gringotts filed a criminal complaint with the Ministry's Department of Magical Law Enforcement at 8 o'clock. We have also filed a formal notice of investigation with the ICW." He paused. "As of 6 o'clock this morning, Dumbledore left his office at Hogwarts. His personal vault has been frozen pending the investigation. He has not been located." "He ran," Harry said. "He ran," Ragnar confirmed. Harry looked back down at the audit. His finger traced one of the numbers, one of the smaller ones, near the bottom of a column that listed individual amounts. 3,100 families, he said. "That's a lot of people who lost things." "It is. They'll get it back. That is the bank's intention, yes. The recovery process will be lengthy. The legal structure is complex. But Gringotts does not abandon its obligations to its clients." Ragnar's voice had something in it that might have been, in a human, called personal. "This happened under our roof. We allowed it to happen. That is an embarrassment we intend to correct." Harry nodded slowly. Then he said something that made Mira set down her quill. "The families need to know first. Before you announce it publicly. Before the ministry makes it political." He looked up at Ragnar. "If they find out from a newspaper, they'll feel like it was done to them twice." There was a silence. Ragnar looked at Harry with an expression that Mira had never seen on his face before and couldn't quite name. Then he said, "You are 6 years old." "Yes," Harry said. "How do you know about the ministry making things political?" "I don't," Harry said, "but you said he used to be headmaster. That means he's important. And when important people get caught doing bad things, I think governments try to be part of the story." He paused. "Vernon does that." "Vernon," Ragnar said. "My uncle." Ragnar made a sound that was probably, in Goblin, the equivalent of a short, sharp laugh. He looked at Mira. She looked back. He turned back to Harry. "The families will be notified directly," he said. "By private courier, in writing, before any public announcement. The notifications will go out today." He folded his hands. "Is there anything else you feel the bank should consider?" Harry thought about it with the seriousness of someone who'd been asked a genuine question by someone they believed meant it. "I want a list," he said. "Of all the names. I don't want them to be a number. 3,100 is a number. I want to know their people." The silence this time was longer. "You will have your list," Ragnar said. He stood, straightened his robes, and looked at Harry one final time with those light-absorbing eyes. "Your grandfather would have liked you," he said. "That is a meaningful statement, coming from me." He left. Harry looked at Mira. Is he always like that? Like what? Like someone who's deciding what everything is worth while you're talking. Yes, she said. But he decided you were worth his time. That means something. Harry looked at the audit still spread on the table. He put his hand flat on it, fingers spread, the way someone might touch something to make sure it was real. Mira, he said. Yes. The suppression. The one on the house. He looked up at her. Was that Dumbledore too? She held his gaze. We think so. He nodded, like he'd already known, like he'd been waiting for confirmation rather than information. Then he picked up his book and went back to reading. The list arrived on his table 2 hours later, 3,100 names, written in the cramped, precise hand of Gringotts scribes, on rolls of cream parchment that smelled of ink and something older. Harry unrolled the first one and began to read. Mira watched him from the doorway. The enchanted window showed rain over the highlands, cold and grey and driving sideways. The torches in the corridor behind her threw warm light across the stone. She thought about Dumbledore, somewhere in the world, running. She thought about 3,100 families opening letters today that began with the words Gringotts Bank regrets to inform you that an irregularity in your account has been identified and is under active investigation. She thought about a 6-year-old boy who'd spent his whole life being told he was worth nothing, sitting in a room underground reading a list of names and already, instinctively, knowing that people mattered more than numbers. She thought Ragnarok was right. His grandfather would have liked him. She went to make more tea. Chapter 2, The Weight of 3,000 Names. The inheritance testing suite was on the third sublevel of Gringotts, behind a door that looked like solid gold but was, as Mira explained, actually bronze with a gold veneer because the goblins found the pretension of solid gold doors amusing rather than impressive. Harry filed this information away with the same careful attention he gave everything, which was total. The room behind the door was circular, maybe 30 feet across, with a domed ceiling that had been carved to look like the night sky, not a representation of it, but the actual sky, updated in real time through a charm that had been running continuously since 1743. It was 3 in the afternoon but the ceiling showed a deep, clear midnight, stars scattered thickly across it, and Harry stopped in the doorway and looked up for a full 10 seconds before he remembered himself. Go ahead, Mira said. Everyone does it. It's real? He asked without looking down. Real sky, yes. Somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, where it's actually night. The charm finds the clearest sky available and projects it. He finally looked down and saw the room properly, the stone floor, the low table at the center with 2 chairs and a number of objects arranged on it that he didn't recognize, and the 2 goblins waiting beside it. One was a young clerk with a ledger. The other was a goblin he hadn't met yet, female, with gray-streaked dark hair and the air of someone who had conducted hundreds of these sessions and found almost none of them interesting. This is Assessor Gripholt, Mira said. She'll conduct the inheritance testing. Gripholt looked at Harry with brisk appraisal. Sit down, she said. Not rudely, just efficiently. Harry sat. Inheritance testing determines the full scope of your magical and blood connections to existing accounts, dormant vaults, titles, properties, and hereditary magical gifts. It takes approximately 1 hour. Some of it is uncomfortable. None of it is dangerous. She gestured to the objects on the table, a shallow stone bowl, a small blade, a quill that glowed faintly silver, and what looked like a compass, except it had no needle and its face was covered in symbols rather than directions. You will contribute a few drops of blood to the lineage bowl. The quill will then document the results, the compass will assess your magical inheritance potential, and I will read the full report. Questions. What makes it uncomfortable? Harry asked. Gripholt looked almost approving at the precision of the question. The compass. When it measures magical inheritance potential, it draws on your core to take a reading. It will feel like something is pulling on the center of your chest. Briefly. All right, Harry said. The blade was small and silver and quick, a tiny sting on his index finger, 3 drops of blood into the stone bowl, and then the room changed. It was the only word for it. The blood hit the stone and spread in patterns that shouldn't have been possible from 3 drops of liquid, spreading outward in fine lines that mapped across the bowl's surface, and as it spread the silver quill lifted from the table and began writing in the air, lines of luminous script appearing and hanging suspended above the bowl, multiplying fast, and Harry watched them with those wide green eyes, and the clerk's quill scratched frantically in the ledger, and the room was very quiet. Except for the scratch of quills and the faint, distant sound of the bank working around them. It went on for longer than Mira expected. The quill kept writing. The suspended script kept multiplying. She'd attended dozens of inheritance testings, and the usual duration of the aerial script phase was somewhere between 90 seconds and 4 minutes. At the 7-minute mark, Gripholt made a sound. It was small. A sharp exhale through the nose. The goblin equivalent of dropped composure. "What?" Harry asked, watching her. "A moment," Gripholt said, which was not an answer. At 11 minutes, the quill finally slowed, wrote 3 final lines, and settled back on the table. The suspended script hung in the air in a dense, glowing column that reached from the surface of the bowl nearly to the ceiling. Gripholt walked around it slowly, reading, her expression doing careful nothing. The clerk had stopped writing and was staring. Harry looked at Mira. She looked at the script and kept her face neutral with some effort. The primary lines she could read were the ones nearest the base, the direct lineage entries. Potter, obviously, going back 11 generations. But below that, intersecting bloodlines, Peveril, which she'd half expected, as old as British magical history. Gryffindor, which she hadn't, not the title, but the blood, 7 generations back through a female line that had never been publicly documented. Then the matrilineal lines from Lily's side, the Evans family ran clean Muggle for 4 generations, but above that, the magic surfaced, older than Evans, older than anything Mira could place by sight. But it was the inheritance connections above the bloodline entries, the connected accounts, the vaulted legacies, the titles and claims, that made the columns so tall. "Mira," Gripholt said, in a very even voice. "Take the boy for a walk. Come back in 20 minutes. Harry looked at Gripholt. Then at the column of script. Then back at Gripholt. "It's about me," he said. "I'd like to know." "You will know," Gripholt said. "In 20 minutes, when I have read it properly and can tell you accurately rather than partially. It would not serve you to receive incomplete information." He considered that. It was a better argument than most adults gave him when they told him to go away, so he stood up, and walked with Mira out of the room. They sat in the corridor on a stone bench that had been carved with geometric patterns along the back and arms. Mira had conjured tea from somewhere. She seemed to produce tea from the environment the way other people produced air, and Harry sat with his cup warming his hands even though it wasn't cold and looked at the gold and bronze door. "It's a lot, isn't it?" he said. "Not really a question." "Yes," she said. "Because of the 3,000 people. Their inheritances being attached to my name." "Partly." She paused. But the bloodline entries were long before Gripholt looked surprised. "That's separate." He thought about that. "My parents weren't just ordinary people, were they?" "No. Your father came from old money and older blood. Your mother was Muggle-born, but magical lineages surface in Muggle families sometimes. It skips generations, shows up in one person without showing in anyone around them. In your mother's case, the lineage appears to have been very old indeed." He turned his cup in his hands. Dumbledore knew all this. Anyone who ran an inheritance test would have known. Or could have. But he didn't tell me. He said it flatly, without heat, the way he said most things. He put me in that house and didn't tell me any of it. Mira looked at him. There wasn't a good answer for that, so she didn't try to provide one. "The suppression on the house," Harry continued. "If my magic was suppressed, would it affect the test?" She'd been waiting for that question. He always got there. No. The lineage bowl reads blood, not active magical output. The suppression would have slowed your development, but it wouldn't hide what you are. She paused. It would just mean that what you are has been held back for years and now has nowhere to go but forward. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Is that good?" "Honestly? We don't entirely know. Suppressed magic that's released can be unpredictable. It can come in surges. We'll manage it carefully." She met his eyes. "But yes, Harry. I think, on balance, it's good." The bronze door opened and Gripholt stood in the frame. "Come back in." The clerk had transcribed the aerial script into the ledger and the ledger was now very thick. Gripholt stood with her hands folded behind her back and looked at Harry in a way that was different from how she'd looked at him before, not softer, exactly, goblins didn't really do soft, but more careful. Like he was something that needed to be handled with appropriate attention. "I am going to give you the results in 3 parts, she said. Bloodline. Inherited titles and properties. And what the bank terms active inheritance potential, which concerns the stolen funds." She paused. "Stop me if you need clarification." "All right," Harry said. Bloodline. You are the last living heir of the House of Potter, which is an ancient and noble house with accounts and property holdings dating to the 12th century. Through your father's maternal line, you carry Peveril blood. The Peverils were among the earliest magical families in Britain, and while the house has no surviving formal structure, the blood carries certain hereditary magical traits that I will address under active inheritance potential. She paused. Through your mother's line, you are a descendant of Ignotus Peveril, which means your father was also a Peveril descendant through a different branch. That convergence is significant and unusual. Harry processed this. My parents were distantly related? In the way that all very old families eventually are, yes. It is not uncommon and not concerning. What it means is that the Peveril traits in you are doubled. She looked at her notes. From your mother's deeper line, which required additional research to trace, you have ancestry connecting through a Scottish magical family called McNair, not the current McNairs, a much older branch, and through them to a line that appears in Gringotts records as the pre-Norman gifted. This is an historical categorization, not a title. It refers to magical families who predate the formal structuring of British wizarding society and whose gifts were documented by early Gringotts assessors. What gifts? Harry asked. The records are incomplete. The Gringotts assessors of the 9th and 10th centuries did not have our current vocabulary for magical taxonomy. But the notation beside your mother's ancestral line uses the term innate persuasion of reality, which is the older language for what we currently call wandless and wordless magic of a structural nature. She looked at him. In simple terms, magic that bends the rules other magic follows. Harry looked at his hands. Mira watched him. The titles, Gripholt continued, moving forward with the composure of a professional who understood that allowing too much silence in these moments was not useful. You are, as the last of the Potter line, Lord Potter by hereditary right. This was never activated or formally recognized because no one filed the appropriate documentation with the ministry or this bank after your parents died, which is irregular and which the bank considers its own failure to have noticed. She said it with the flatness of someone accepting institutional responsibility. Harry looked up. You are also, she said, and here her voice did something infinitesimal, by right of conquest, which is an archaic provision but remains legally valid under the Goblin-Human Accords and under certain provisions of the Wisengamot's property charter, the heir to the titles and properties of Voldemort. Silence. He died, Harry said slowly. When he tried to kill me. He was destroyed by the rebound of his own curse, yes. The legal question of what constitutes death under wizarding inheritance law is one the ministry has been carefully avoiding for 5 years. Gringotts is less concerned with political convenience. She looked at him steadily. Under the right of conquest provision, which has governed magical dueling inheritance since the 14th century, when a magical practitioner is defeated in a duel or magical combat that results in the transfer of their power, their titles and properties pass to the victor. Lord Voldemort held several titles under assumed names, a significant property in London, holdings in Scotland. All of these have been in legal limbo since 1981. And now? Harry said. And now we know you're the heir. The bank will begin the formal process of transfer. She paused. There are also the families. 3,100 accounts, as you know. The funds themselves will be returned to those families, that is settled and non-negotiable. But the account structures, the proxy trusts, have generated interest over 5 years. A significant amount of interest. That interest, under Gringotts law, is considered damage restitution and it accrues to you as the harmed minor in whose name the scheme was run without consent. Harry frowned. I don't want money that came from those families. It didn't come from those families. It came from Gringotts' managed investment of the stolen principal. The bank generated it. Under our legal code, the institution responsible for allowing the harm also bears partial financial liability. A portion of that liability is expressed as restitution to you. He thought about it. And the families get everything that was originally theirs? With 5 years of their own managed interest, yes. Then I'll take the restitution, he said. But I want it noted that I think the bank owes those families more than interest. Gripholt looked at him for a moment. Then she made a note in the ledger. Noted, she said, and it had the weight of something official. The active inheritance potential, she continued. This is the most complex portion. The suppression ward on your guardian's home dampened your magical output for approximately 5 years, we're estimating it was placed when you were approximately 18 months old, based on the architectural integration into the ward structure. That level of integration suggests the ward was not placed hastily. It was planned. The room was very quiet. The petrol convergence in your blood means that your magical core is not standard. The assessor's compass will now complete its reading. She picked up the compass from the table and set it in front of Harry. Place both hands on it. He did. The compass didn't spin. It opened, the outer casing folded back like petals, layer by layer, revealing something at its center that looked like a miniature sun caught in glass, and the moment Harry's hand settled on it the light at its center went from gold to white and then to something that had no color in it, something that was simply bright, and Mira had to look away for a second. She heard Harry make a small sound, not pain, but the intake of breath of someone who just felt something they hadn't known was there. Like the sensation of a door opening inward. Gripholt was reading the compass face in a low, rapid murmur, not translating, just cataloging. When the light faded she looked at her notes and then at Harry and said, with absolute clinical precision, your magical core is in the 98th percentile of all cores recorded by this instrument since 1789. With the removal of the suppression, you are developing at a rate that will require structured management. The Peveril double inheritance means you have a natural facility for magic that doesn't require the standard learned pathways. You will, with training, access wandless and wordless capability significantly earlier than the norm. How much earlier? Mira asked, because she had to know. The instrument suggests he is already doing it, Gripholt said. On a small scale. Likely without awareness. Harry looked at his hands again. Then he looked at Mira. The cup, he said. What cup? At breakfast yesterday. I wanted more juice and the jug moved. I thought I'd knocked it. You didn't knock it, Gripholt said. He absorbed this. There was a sequence of emotions crossing his face that Mira watched carefully, surprise, which was brief, followed by a kind of recognition, like things were fitting together that hadn't fitted before, followed by something that wasn't satisfaction exactly but was in the same family. The look of someone whose sense of themselves had just gained a new and solid floor. The wand he has, Mira said to Gripholt. The one from the Dursleys' house. It's not his. Obviously not, Gripholt said. We'll have Ollivander consulted. Harry looked up. Ollivander makes wands. Ollivanders makes wands, yes. Can I have one that actually works? Gripholt made the small goblin sound that Mira had come to recognize as the closest thing to amusement in her repertoire. That is generally the point of the consultation. Ragnarok came at 5. He walked into Harry's rooms without knocking, which was his right as director and which Harry had apparently already come to terms with, because he just looked up from the parchment he was reading, the list, still, working through it page by page, and waited. Ragnarok sat down in the chair across from the couch and set a folder on the table. He looked at Harry. Then at the list. Then back at Harry. "How far have you got?" he asked. "Page 14, Harry said. "There are 47 pages. "I know." Harry rolled up the page he'd finished and set it aside. "You're here about the ministry." "I'm here about the ministry," Ragnarok confirmed. "They contacted us this morning, not Madam Bones, who is the person they should have sent, but a junior undersecretary, which is their way of expressing that they want information without committing to anything." He set the folder on the table between them. "They want to know the scope of the complaint against Dumbledore. They are, I suspect, hoping it is small enough to manage quietly." "Is it?" Ragnarok looked at him. "No." Harry nodded. "What do they actually want?" "They want to know if we will file with the Wisengamot or handle it internally. They are hoping for internal, because a Wisengamot case is public record and the press will have it within hours of filing." "The press finding out is good," Harry said. "For some purposes, yes. For others, it creates complications. The ministry will attempt to control the narrative. They will likely suggest that Dumbledore was acting with good intentions, that the stolen inheritances were redirected toward war effort funds, that the blood ward suppression was a protective measure for your safety. They will make it about Voldemort. They will make it political and they will make it about fear, because fear is the instrument they're most comfortable with." Harry thought about it. He pulled his knees up onto the couch, tucking his feet under him, and was quiet for a long moment, and Mira watched him think. "Then we control it first," he said. "Gringotts issues a statement before the ministry does. Full information. No, waiting for them to frame it." He looked at Ragnarok. "The 3,100 families already have their letters. They know. So the press finding out isn't giving them information that could hurt those families. It's just giving the public information the families already have." Ragnarok looked at him with that evaluating stillness. "You are suggesting we preempt the ministry entirely." "I'm suggesting the truth is better said once, loudly, than managed into something smaller." He paused. "Also they sent a junior undersecretary. You shouldn't reward that." There was a pause. "No," Ragnarok said, and he sounded almost satisfied. "We should not." He picked up the folder and opened it. "There is one more thing. 3 families from the list have already responded to their letters. Not by owl, they came here in person. Today. They're here." Harry sat up straighter. "In the waiting rooms on the 2nd level, yes. Gringotts did not summon them. They came themselves. The Shafik family, they lost a significant inheritance. The Longbottoms, what remained of Frank and Alice Longbottom's estate after the legal costs of their hospitalization was redirected. And a woman named Augusta Longbottom, the grandmother, who came on behalf of her grandson." He paused. "The 3rd family is smaller, a witch named Andromeda Tonks, who lost a modest inheritance from her mother's estate. She brought her daughter." Harry looked at Ragnarok. "Can I meet them?" The question clearly surprised the clerk, who was in the corner with a ledger. Ragnarok's expression did something complex. "That is unusual," he said slowly. "They came here," Harry said. "They know about me. I'd like to know about them." He looked at Ragnarok steadily. "And I'd like them to know that I know they matter more than the number does." Mira thought about what she told Ragnarok in her note the previous night. She thought about Ragnarok repeating back to her, "You are 6 years old." "I'll arrange it," Ragnarok said. The meeting room on the second level was larger than the healer's suite but less warm, all polished stone and bronze fixtures and the kind of formal architecture that said this is where serious things are discussed. Mira had asked for tea to be brought, which softened it slightly. Augusta Longbottom came in like a force of weather, tall, imperious, wearing a coat with a dead bird on the hat and an expression that had been carved by years of loss into something harder than most materials. She looked at Harry with sharp eyes and then looked around for the adult who was clearly supposed to be managing him. "You're the child," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "They told me you asked to meet us." "I did." She sat down, arranged her coat, and looked at him with an expression that was recalibrating. Behind her came a boy, round-faced, slightly pink around the eyes and the way of someone who'd been crying and was now working hard not to, perhaps a year or so older than Harry, with a look of profound anxiety that sat naturally on his features as though it lived there. He sat beside Augusta and looked at Harry with cautious, genuine curiosity. Andromeda Tonks came in next. She was a tall woman with dark hair that had been neatly arranged and a face that had the particular quality of someone who had made a choice that cost them significantly and had decided it was worth it. Her daughter was perhaps 8, with the wildly distractible energy of someone whose hair was changing color without apparent effort. It went from brown to pink to something between the two as she looked around the room. "Her hair does that," Andromeda said, catching Myra's look. "She's a metamorphmagus. She can't always help it in new places." "It's brilliant," Harry said, which made the girl, Tonks, her mother called her Tonks, look at him with surprised delight and her hair go decisively, enthusiastically pink. The Shafiqs came last, a couple in their 40s, composed and careful, who sat down and looked at Harry with the politely neutral expression of people who had no idea what to expect and were reserving judgment. He nodded at them and they nodded back. He looked at all of them. 6 years old, sitting at a formal table in a conference room under a goblin bank, slightly too small for his chair because everything was slightly too large for him. He had the list in his hands, pages 7 and 8, which he'd been on when Ragnarok had come, and he set it down on the table. "I wanted to meet you," he said, "because I've been reading the list. The names. And I wanted you to know that I didn't know any of this was happening. That your money was in my name. I didn't know and I would have stopped it if I could." He paused. "I know I was 6 when it happened and I couldn't actually have stopped it. But I wanted to say it anyway." Augusta Longbottom looked at him for a long moment. Then something moved in her face, not softness. Augusta Longbottom didn't traffic in softness, but something that recognized something. "The money," she said, "was what remained of what Frank and Alice had set aside for Neville." The round-faced boy, Neville, looked at his hands. "It will go back to Neville," Harry said. "With interest. Ragnarok, the director, told me all the principal will be restored. With what it would have earned." "I know," Augusta said. "I received the letter." She looked at him steadily. "What I want to know, boy, is what happens now. Not to the money. To Dumbledore. The bank filed a criminal complaint this morning," Harry said. "He ran." "I know that too." Her voice was sharp. "I want to know who is pursuing him. Because the ministry, half the ministry owes Dumbledore favors. Half the ministry thinks he's a great man who did great things and whatever crimes he committed were secondary to that. They'll try to manage it," Harry said. "Ragnarok says so. But Gringotts is going to file publicly before they can frame it." Augusta was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the precise, clipped enunciation of someone committing to a position, "When they do, cite Frank and Alice Longbottom. Use the name. I am giving you permission." Harry looked at her. "Why?" "Because my son and his wife have been in St. Mungo's for 5 years, unable to speak, unable to recognize their own child, because they fought against Voldemort and were tortured for it. And then they lost the last of what they'd saved for Neville's future to a man who was supposed to protect people like them." She held his gaze. "Cite them. Make it real. Make it impossible to manage. I will, Harry said. Neville had looked up. He was watching Harry with wide, wet eyes. They really get the money back? He asked. His voice was small and earnest. They really get it back, Harry said. All of it. Neville nodded, pressed his lips together, and looked away. Mira looked somewhere else too for a moment and focused on her tea. Tonks had, at some point, migrated around the table and was now sitting 2 chairs away from Harry with her elbows on the table, examining him with the intense personal interest of an 8-year-old who has decided someone is interesting. Her hair was still pink. Can you do magic yet? She asked. A bit, Harry said. Mostly by accident. I can change my face, she said, and demonstrated. Her nose went flat, then enormous, then she gave herself freckles, then reversed it all with the visible concentration of someone who hadn't quite mastered the control. Gran says it's not a real magical skill. Mum says it's brilliant. Your mum's right, Harry said. Tonks beamed. Her hair went gold. Andromeda Tonks was watching Harry with an expression that was private and careful. He looked at her and she said, quietly, you have Lily's eyes. He stilled. I knew your mother. We were not close, different houses, different years. But I knew her. She paused. She would have been furious about this. Yes, Harry said. I think she would. Something passed between them, something that didn't need more words than that. Andromeda nodded once, and it had the quality of a decision. We will help, she said. However the bank needs us. Statement, testimony, whatever is useful. The Shafiq said the same. Augusta's contribution was to say, I know 4 other families from the list who will cooperate. I'll reach them today. Harry looked at the people around the table, a fierce old grandmother, a crying boy trying not to cry, a woman rebuilding a life, a pink-haired 8-year-old showing off, a careful couple who'd come here without knowing what to expect. He looked at them all and said, thank you for coming. You didn't have to. No, Augusta said. We didn't. She looked at him with those sharp, appraising eyes. You did, though. This. She gestured vaguely at the room. You asked us to come and then you sat there and apologized for something you didn't do. That was either very shrewd or very decent. I meant it, Harry said. I know you did, she said. That's what I thought. That evening, Ragnarok issued the public statement. It went out through the Goblin Courier Network, to every major wizarding publication in Britain, Europe, and the international wizarding press. It was 700 words. It was entirely factual. It contained the number 3100, the name Albus Dumbledore, the words criminal misappropriation and fraudulent account structuring and deliberate suppression of a minor's magical development, and at the end, at Harry's insistence, it contained 2 additional names, Frank and Alice Longbottom, with Augusta Longbottom's explicit permission. The Daily Prophet ran it on the front page the following morning under the headline, Gringotts, Dumbledore stole from 3,100 families. Fled Britain before arrest. Harry read it at breakfast, sitting in his rooms with the enchanted window showing morning mist over the highlands and a bowl of porridge going cold at his elbow because he'd forgotten to eat. He read it twice. He folded the paper carefully. Mira came in with tea and looked at his face. All right? Yes, he said. He picked up his spoon. What happens today? Today, she said, sitting down, the ministry panics. And then Amelia Bones does her job. Is she good? The best they have. He ate his porridge and watched the mist move over the highlands and thought about Dumbledore, somewhere in the world this morning, reading the same front page. He thought about 3,100 names, and a list 47 pages long, and a boy named Neville trying not to cry in a conference room. He thought about his mother's eyes. He picked up page 15 of the list and kept reading. Chapter 3, The Ministry Catches Fire. The atrium of the Ministry of Magic was not built for chaos, but it was very good at containing it. Amelia Bones had walked through those gold-tiled floors thousands of times in her career. She knew the sound of the place, the constant low hum of interdepartmental memos, the crack of incoming flues, the shuffle and murmur of hundreds of witches and wizards doing the small administrative work of keeping Wizarding Britain running. She knew the smell of it, the particular combination of polished brass and old magic and someone's lunch heating in a fourth-floor break room. She did not recognize it this morning. The memos were not flying in their usual orderly loops. They were colliding with each other mid-air, crashing into pillars, piling up at the entrance to the lifts in papery drifts. The hum of conversation had risen to something that was distinctly not conversation. People were standing in clusters with copies of the Prophet, talking fast and low and looking toward the lifts as though they expected something to come out of them. Amelia strode through the atrium without slowing, her aura robe set in the particular posture that parted crowds, and she had the Prophet folded under her arm and 7 years of institutional fury looking for somewhere to be useful. She'd read the statement at 5 in the morning. She'd read it again at 6. She'd made 4 calls, checked 3 pieces of restricted documentation she'd had on file for 2 years and never been able to use, and then she'd come in early and gone straight to the minister's office and said 3 words that had never felt so straightforward in her professional life. "I told you." Cornelius Fudge had looked at her across his desk with the expression of a man watching a controlled demolition happening to his career and said, "Now, Amelia, we need to be careful, careful," she'd said, with the flatness of someone who'd just run out of patience for that particular word. "Careful is what we've been for 11 years. Careful is how we ended up here." She'd put the Prophet on his desk, face up. "Gringotts has filed. The ICW has been notified. 3 countries are requesting extradition documentation, which means we either issue a warrant before they do or we explain to the international community why Britain is protecting a man who stole inheritances from 3,000 families and deliberately suppressed a child's magic." Fudge had opened and closed his mouth. "I'm issuing the warrant," she said. "This morning. Do you have an objection?" He'd had about 15 objections. She'd overruled all of them on legal grounds, which was her particular gift, and by 8 o'clock she'd had the warrant on the wire. Now it was 9:30 and the atrium was in the state she'd expected, and she had a meeting scheduled in 20 minutes that she was not looking forward to but was absolutely prepared for. The Waisengemot convened in emergency session at 10. Amelia had been in emergency Waisengemot sessions before. She'd been in the ones after the first fall of Voldemort, in the chaos of 1981, when no one was quite sure what had happened and everyone was very sure they needed to be seen responding to it. She'd been in the ones in the 80s when the Death Eater trials happened. Those had been uglier, shorter on evidence and longer on fear, and she'd argued for proper procedure in rooms that didn't want to hear it. This one was different because the Waisengemot didn't know how to vote. Usually you could read the chamber within the first 10 minutes, the factions formed quickly, the procedural motions told you which way things were going to fall. Today the factions were confused, because Dumbledore had spent 50 years being the kind of figure that people built their positions around. He was the point that the compass pointed at. Without him, the needle swung. Chief Warlock Ogden, filling in since Dumbledore had held that position himself, which was a problem Amelia had also been noting and writing for years, opened the session with a prepared statement that was about 100 words shorter than his usual opening, because he'd clearly written it quickly and in a state of shock. The matter before the Waisengemot today concerns the criminal complaint filed by Gringotts Bank against Albus Dumbledore, formerly Chief Warlock, formerly Supreme Mugwump, formerly Headmaster of Hogwarts School. The complaint alleges, "We've all read the statement," said Lord Greengrass from the 4th bench. He was 60, polished, and had the legal instincts of someone whose family had survived every political turn of the last 2 centuries by reading rooms very accurately. The question isn't what it alleges. The question is what we do about it. "The warrant has been issued," Amelia said, from her seat at the prosecution bench. "The legal question is settled. What we're here to discuss is the scope of the investigation, the protection of the affected families, and the status of Hogwarts in Dumbledore's absence." "Protection of the affected families is Gringotts' jurisdiction," said a voice from the left bench, Aldous Fawcett, who'd been on the Wiesengomot for 30 years and had the philosophical flexibility of someone who'd survived every political wind by bending. The school is a separate matter. We shouldn't conflate them. I'm not conflating them, Amelia said. I'm itemizing them. The child, said Griselda Marchbanks, who was ancient and sharp and had been on the Wiesengomot since before most of the current members were born. She said it into a brief silence and the word landed solidly. What about the child? Harry Potter is in Gringotts' custody, Amelia said. He's receiving appropriate care. He's 6 years old, Marchbanks said. He was placed with Muggles, unsupervised, apparently, for 5 years, by Dumbledore, without this body's knowledge or consent. I want it on the record that no one in this chamber authorized that placement. I want that on the record now, before someone tries to attach our names to it retroactively. There was a ripple through the chamber. Several members moved to speak. So noted, Ogden said, and his scribe's quill scratched loud in the sudden quiet. The boy needs a guardian, Marchbanks continued. A proper, legal, vetted guardian. Not a bank. Gringotts has legal authority to maintain his custody during the investigation, Amelia began. I'm not questioning their authority, Marchbanks said. I'm questioning whether it's in the child's best interest to be housed indefinitely in a bank. He needs an advocate. A person. Someone who can represent him in this room. She looked around the chamber. Because if we are going to discuss his inheritance, his titles, his rights under the charter, and we will be discussing them, he needs someone who speaks for him. Amelia sat back and thought for exactly 2 seconds. I'll speak to him today. The notification came to Mira through official channels at 11:15, a formal ministry request for a welfare consultation visit with the minor beneficiary Harry James Potter, requested by Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, to be conducted at Gringotts' premises at the minor's convenience. At the minor's convenience was not standard ministry language. It was the kind of phrasing that communicated respect before you'd even met the person it described. Mira showed it to Harry. He read it twice. She's the law enforcement one, he asked. Head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, yes. She issued the warrant for Dumbledore. She did. And now she wants to talk to me. He handed the parchment back. What do you think she wants? I think she wants to size you up, Mira said. And I think she wants to offer you something. A guardian? She looked at him. You heard about that? Ragnarok told me this morning about the Wiesengomot session. He told me Marchbanks raised it. He was already reaching for a clean robe, she'd acquired proper clothes for him, things that actually fit, which he'd accepted with the particular gratitude of someone who had never taken clothing for granted. Can I decide who it is? Legally, at your age, a guardian would normally be appointed for you, not by you. But given the circumstances, she paused. Given the circumstances, I think anyone who tried to appoint a guardian over your objection would have a difficult time of it. He smiled. It was a small smile, quick, but it changed his whole face, made him look 6 instead of a measured, ancient something. Good, he said. Amelia Bones arrived at 2 in the afternoon, alone, which was a statement in itself. She was a solid woman in her mid-50s with square-framed glasses and gray-streaked hair pulled back with no-nonsense practicality, and she walked into Gringotts carrying her credentials and the particular posture of someone who was used to rooms trying to intimidate them and had long since stopped being intimidated by rooms. She was shown to the meeting room on the 2nd level, the same room where Harry had met the families. The tea was already there. So was Harry, sitting across from the door, with Mira on his left and an empty chair that was clearly for Amelia on the other side of the table. Amelia stopped just inside the door and looked at him. He looked back at her. She sat down and poured herself tea, and said, I'm Amelia Bones. I run the department that handles magical law enforcement. I've been following this case since the complaint came through yesterday morning. I know, Harry said. You issued Dumbledore's warrant. I did. Thank you. She looked at him over her teacup. Whatever she'd expected from a 6-year-old, it hadn't been that, delivered straight, with no hedging. "You're welcome," she said, and meant it. "I came because there are decisions being made in the Waisengamat about your situation, and I thought those decisions should involve you." "What decisions? Who speaks for you? You have titles, you have property claims, you have a legal case against a man who is currently being hunted across Europe. The Waisengamat wants to move on all of it, and moving on all of it without your input is," she paused. "It's not something I'm prepared to do." "But most of them are prepared to," Harry said. She considered him. "Some of them, yes. Some of them are also prepared to frame this entire situation as a regrettable misunderstanding on Dumbledore's part. They're working on that framing as we speak." "What does the misunderstanding look like in their version?" "Wartime decisions. Imperfect choices made under pressure. Dumbledore believed the Blood Wards would protect you and went further than he should have. The inheritance redirection was, in their version, a wartime fund management scheme that wasn't properly documented, not deliberate theft." Harry was quiet for a moment. His expression was doing something careful and controlled. "Those families lost money," he said. "Whether it was a war fund or not. Neville Longbottom's parents are in St. Mungo's and they can't recognize him, and the money that was supposed to be his for school and for his future was taken. Whether it was a wartime decision or not, that happened." "I agree with you," Amelia said. "Then don't let them say it was a misunderstanding." "I intend not to. But I need more than my intentions." She set down her cup. "I need testimonies. From the families, from the bank, and, if you're willing, from you." "What do you need from me specifically?" She looked at him carefully. "The suppression ward. The medical documentation of your condition at the time of removal. The 2 broken fingers that were left to heal without treatment. The malnutrition." She paused, and something moved through her professional composure, something that was personal and controlled but present. "If you're willing, your testimony about your life at that house. Not to punish your relatives, necessarily, that's a separate question. But to establish that you were placed in an unsafe situation deliberately, that it was not an accident of oversight." He was quiet for a long moment. Mira watched him. "If I testify," he said, "it's in front of the Waisengamat. Or in written declaration, if you prefer. You wouldn't have to appear in person." "I'll appear," he said. Amelia looked at him. "You understand that appearing means, that people will see me and have opinions about me, and some of them will try to make me into a symbol." "Yes." He looked back at her steadily. "But if I submit a written declaration, someone else reads it. If I appear, I say it myself, in my own words. And I can make sure it means what I mean it to mean." The silence stretched. Amelia Bones set down her tea and said, "Gringotts didn't tell me you were like this." "What did they tell you?" "That you were exceptional." She paused. "That's not the same as prepared." "I've had time to think," he said. 4 days. 4 days is more than I've had before." He looked at her simply. "At the Desleys I mostly just existed. Here I can think. It turns out I have a lot of thoughts." Amelia made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was its own kind of response. She looked at Mira. "He needs an official advocate in the Waisengamat chamber. Someone with legal standing to object on his behalf, speak on his behalf, challenge motions on his behalf." "I know," Mira said. "Will you do it?" Mira blinked. "I'm a healer, not a legal. You're on the Gringotts staff, which gives you standing under the Accords. You can be designated as a minor beneficiary advocate, it's an actual legal role. I checked this morning." Amelia looked at her without apology. "You found him. He trusts you. It should be you." Mira looked at Harry. He was watching her with those green eyes and he said nothing, which was its own form of asking. "Yes," she said. "All right." The press found Gringotts at 4 o'clock. They couldn't get in, of course. The bank had wards that made ministry security look like a suggestion box, but they gathered at the marble steps on Diagon Alley in a small crowd that kept growing, and by 5 there were 17 journalists including the Prophet's lead political correspondent and 2 reporters from the European Wizarding News Syndicate. A photographer from Which Weekly had set up on the steps opposite and was shooting anything that moved. Harry heard about it from the goblin clerk who brought his dinner. "They're waiting for you," the clerk said, with the flat disapproval of someone who found journalism fundamentally undignified. "I know," Harry said. He was at the table with the list, page 22, which meant he was nearly halfway, and he kept reading while the clerk set out the meal. "What are they saying?" "Various things. The Prophet correspondent has been attempting to get a comment from our public relations office every 20 minutes. He has been declined each time." The clerk set down a bowl of stew with the precision of someone who had decided this was the most professional bowl of stew ever delivered. "He did publish a piece this afternoon suggesting that the minor beneficiary is being held against his will by the bank." Harry looked up. "Against my will?" "Yes." "Mira." She looked up from the chair where she'd been working on paperwork. "Can I send a response to that?" She considered. "What kind of response?" "A short one," he said. "I write it, it goes out under my name. Just 3 sentences. I'm not being held against my will. I came here voluntarily. I'm staying because I choose to." He paused. 4 sentences. "The bank has been looking after me and I'm grateful." Mira was quiet for a moment, thinking about the chain of consequences. Ragnock should approve it. Obviously. He was already reaching for parchment. Ragnock approved it in 11 minutes with 2 minor edits. He changed grateful to appreciative of the bank's diligence, which was more formally appropriate, and he added a sentence at the end that read, "I look forward to addressing the Wisengamot at the appropriate time." Harry read the edit and nodded. The statement went out at 6. By 7, it was the most discussed thing on every wizarding news channel in Britain, because it was written in the clear, direct language of a 6-year-old who had not had anyone soften his words for him, and it read like nothing anyone had expected from a child who was supposed to be passive and symbolic and available for other people to project onto. "I am not being held at Gringotts. I came here with the bank's welfare healer, Mira Goldthorn, because my home was not safe. I am staying because I choose to, and because the bank is helping me understand what happened to my family's accounts. The bank has been diligent in looking after me and I appreciate it. I look forward to addressing the Wisengamot at the appropriate time." Harry James Potter Augusta Longbottom sent a note to Mira that arrived at 7:30. It said only, "Good. Keep going." The fire, when it came from a direction no one had quite anticipated. At 8 o'clock that evening, the Hogwarts Board of Governors issued an emergency statement announcing that in Dumbledore's absence, and pending the outcome of the criminal investigation, the position of headmaster was to be temporarily filled by Deputy Headmistress Professor Minerva McGonagall, and that the school would open as scheduled in September. What the statement didn't mention, but what Ragnock came to Harry's rooms to discuss at 8:30, was the secondary document that had been filed by one Governor Lucius Malfoy, requesting that the board consider a restructuring of Hogwarts governance to reduce the headmaster's unilateral authority over student placement and financial management. "Malfoy," Harry said. "Yes. He's on the list." Harry had been through enough pages to recognize the name, a medium-sized Malfoy family inheritance that had been redirected. "He is," Ragnock said. "Which places him in an interesting position. His public reputation is as a Dumbledore opponent, he has always been on the opposite side of the political divide. But the stolen inheritance gives him legitimate grievance independent of politics. He will try to use this case to consolidate position." "That's fine," Harry said, "as long as he doesn't try to use me to do it." Ragnock looked at him. "He will try to do exactly that." "Then I won't let him." Harry looked back at the list. "He's coming tomorrow, isn't he? That's why you're telling me now." "He's requested a meeting, yes." "You are not obligated, I'll meet him." He turned a page. I'll meet everyone. But I'm not letting any of them speak for me. Not Malfoy, not the Ministry, not," he paused, then said it carefully. "Not anyone who wants to use 3,100 families as a political argument without actually caring about what they lost." Ragnar said nothing for a moment. Then, "What do you care about?" Harry looked up. He thought about it honestly, the way he thought about everything, completely, without flinching. "I care about those families getting what was taken from them," he said. "I care about Neville Longbottom having money for school. I care about the fact that someone decided I was a pawn before I was old enough to understand the game." He paused. "And I care about making sure that whoever decides where I live next, it's not someone who thinks I'm useful. And if no one meets that standard, then I live here," Harry said, "and Mira brings tea." Ragnar looked at Mira with an expression that, on a human face, would have been something approaching fondness. On his face it was the absence of disapproval, which was the same thing translated. He left. Harry went back to the list. The morning of the Wisengamot session arrived with the quality of a stone dropping into still water. Mira felt it before she was fully awake, the kind of morning that knew it was significant. She went to check on Harry at 7 and found him already dressed, sitting at the table with breakfast barely touched and a complete list in front of him, all 47 pages, stacked neatly. He'd finished it the night before. She could tell from the way he sat with it, like a person who's read something difficult and is sitting with the weight of having read it. "All of it?" she asked. "All of it." He looked up. "There's a family called Pruitt. 2 brothers, the file says they died in the war. Their sister is Molly Weasley and she has 6 children. What she should have inherited would have paid for all of them to have new school things." Mira sat down. "There's a Muggleborn witch named Mary Perkins who saved 20 years to build a vault for her daughter, and the daughter has nothing now." He was quiet. "There's a man named Fenwick, the note says he was killed before the money could be transferred, and then it was redirected anyway." "Harry, I'm not upset," he said, which wasn't entirely true but wasn't entirely false either. "I just think people should know these aren't numbers. I think when people talk about this case they talk about the legal structure and the financial crime and the politics, and the people get," he touched the top page. "They get smaller." "You're going to say that," Mira said. "Today?" "Yes." She looked at him, dressed properly for the first time, in clean dark robes that fit him, his hair still impossible but his glasses repaired by Gringotts' resident charmworker and sitting straight on his nose. He looked like what he was, a child who had decided to be present at the thing being done in his name. "Are you scared?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "Should I be?" "Most adults are scared of the Wisengamot chamber." "Most adults have more to lose," he said. She looked at him. "I don't mean that in a sad way," he added. "I mean I came from nothing. Everything from here is more. There's nothing they can take." Mira had been a healer for 12 years. She had been in some version of this profession since she was 20, following the particular calling of someone who found themselves at the intersections where people needed both help and advocacy, who couldn't quite separate medicine from justice because in her experience they were usually the same problem. She had seen courage in clinical settings, the kind that lived in the body, in the breath, in the decision to stay conscious. She had never seen it quite like this. "All right," she said. "Let's go." The Wisengamot chamber was underground, deep in the Ministry, a circular room with tiered seating for the full Wisengamot membership that curved up and around a central floor space where witnesses stood. The walls were stone. The light came from floating orbs that gave the whole place the quality of a stage. Harry walked in with Mira on his left and Ragnar on his right. Goblins did not normally attend Wisengamot proceedings, but Ragnar had invoked the bank's right to representation under the Accords and walked in like he owned the architecture, which shut down any objection before it could be voiced. The chamber was full. Every seat taken, a low buzz of voices that dropped to something close to silence when Harry entered. He walked to the central floor and stood there. He was small in the space. The room was designed for adults, the speaking floor placed at the center of a ring of elevated seats so that witnesses were always looking up at the assembled body. Most witnesses stood there with the visible anxiety of someone under examination. Harry stood there and looked up at them, and his expression said clearly that if anyone in this room thought they had authority over him that he hadn't chosen to recognize, they were going to need to demonstrate it. Chief Warlock Ogden cleared his throat. Harry James Potter. Thank you for attending. The Wisengamot, I'd like to read something first, Harry said. Ogden blinked. This isn't normally, I know, Harry said. But I've been reading the list of the families affected, and I'd like to read some of their names. Because I think this chamber is going to spend a lot of time discussing legal structures and political implications, and I think it should start by knowing who it's talking about. Silence. Amelia Bones, from her bench on the left, made no expression whatsoever. But she wasn't stopping him. He pulled 4 pages from his robes. Not the whole list, he'd chosen specifically. He read 40 names. Not quickly, not performatively, just clearly, one after another, each one given a single sentence from the audit, what they'd lost, how long they'd worked for it, what it had been for. Molly Weasley, née Pruitt. Her brothers Gideon and Fabian Pruitt died in the war. What they'd saved for their families was redirected within a year of their deaths. She has 6 children. Neville Longbottom. His parents Frank and Alice are in St. Mungo's. The money they saved for his schooling is gone. Mary Perkins, Muggle-born. Saved for 20 years. Nothing remains. Edmund Fenwick. Killed before the transfer completed. The money moved anyway. He read for 7 minutes. The chamber was absolutely still. When he finished, he folded the pages and looked up again. I'm not a symbol, he said. I know that's what everyone here is used to thinking about when they hear my name, the boy who survived, the thing Voldemort couldn't kill. But I'm not here today as that. I'm here because 3,100 people lost things that were theirs, and those things were lost in my name, and I think the people in this room should understand that before they start making political decisions about what this case means. He paused. I'll answer your questions now. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. Then Griselda Marchbank said, from her high seat, in a voice that had the particular quality of old approval, "Young man, I have been sitting in this chamber for 60 years. I have heard hundreds of witnesses speak from that floor." Harry looked at her. "You are the first," she said, "who made us listen." Not everyone in the chamber looked pleased about it. But no one argued with her. And when the questions came, Harry answered them, directly, clearly, without anger but without softness, the way someone answers questions when they've decided that accuracy is more useful than self-protection. By the time they left the chamber 3 hours later, 7 families from the list had been contacted for immediate restoration proceedings. Amelia Bones had been formally authorized to expand the Dumbledore investigation to include the placement decision and the suppression ward, and a resolution had been passed recognizing Harry's standing as a formal legal party in the proceedings. Ragnarok walked out of the ministry between Harry and Mira and said nothing for a full block. Then he said, "The Pruitt entry. When you read it." The chamber moved. "I know," Harry said. "You planned that." Harry looked up at him. "I planned it in the sense that I thought people mattered more than the legal framework. I didn't plan to move them. I just read the names." Ragnarok looked down at him. The street was busy around them, witches and wizards doing their afternoon business, and none of them recognized the small boy in clean dark robes walking between a half-goblin healer and the director of Gringotts. "When we return to the bank," Ragnarok said, "we are going to discuss Lucius Malfoy." "Yes," Harry said. "He will not be like the families. He is not coming because he was harmed. He is coming because he sees an opportunity." "I know. And you'll still meet him?" Harry looked forward, down the street, toward the marble facade of Gringotts just visible at the end of Diagon Alley. "I'll meet everyone," he said again. But Malfoy's going to figure out pretty quickly that the difference between a pawn and a person is whether the person knows they're on the board. He walked on. Behind him, barely audibly, Ragnarok made the goblin sound that meant a short sharp laugh. Mira thought about Lily Evans's eyes, and the 40 names, and the chamber that had gone still. She thought that whatever came next, Malfoy tomorrow, the investigation spreading outward, Dumbledore somewhere in Europe reading about himself in the morning papers, whatever came next was going to have to reckon with the fact that the symbol had decided to be a person. The world was not going to find that easy to manage. Good. Chapter 4, The Malfoy Complication. Lucius Malfoy arrived at 10 in the morning, which was precisely when he'd said he would arrive, because Lucius Malfoy considered punctuality a form of dominance. He came through the main entrance on Diagon Alley, the marble steps, the grand doors, the full architectural theatre of Gringotts' public face, with his cane clicking against the stone and his robes arranged in the particular way that said, "I am accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around me." He was accompanied by a solicitor whose briefcase had the bulging, self-important look of a man who'd been up since 5 preparing documentation, and behind both of them, quiet and straight-backed and with the composure of someone who had made a private decision before leaving the house that morning, was Narcissa Malfoy. Ragnarok had mentioned she might come. He'd said it in the tone of someone flagging a variable that could go several ways. The meeting room had been changed for this. Not the second-level conference room where Harry had met the families, Ragnarok had booked the formal negotiation suite on the first sublevel, which had higher ceilings and a longer table and the kind of architectural weight that said this is where serious business happens. Mira had noted the choice. Ragnarok was sending a message before anyone sat down. Harry was already there when the Malfoys arrived. He was sitting at the near end of the table with Mira on his left and a Gringotts legal representative, a senior goblin named Sharpclaw whose name, Mira felt, accurately represented his professional style, on his right. He had water. He had the folded pages from yesterday tucked in his robe because he hadn't decided yet whether he'd need them. He watched Lucius Malfoy walk in. Malfoy was tall and blonde and expensive in the way of someone who had never worn anything that didn't cost more than most people earned in a month. He had pale gray eyes that moved around the room in a quick, cataloging sweep, noting Ragnarok at the head of the table, noting the legal representative, noting Mira, and then landing on Harry with an expression that recalibrated visibly, a fraction of a second of genuine recalibration before the mask reassembled. He'd expected a child. What he'd found was someone who was looking back at him. "Mr. Potter," he said smoothly, settling into the chair across the table. The solicitor sat beside him and began opening the briefcase. Narcissa sat at Lucius's other side, arranged her robes, and then looked at Harry with an expression that was doing considerably more than it appeared to be doing. "Mr. Malfoy," Harry said. "Mrs. Malfoy." Narcissa's expression shifted by approximately nothing, but something in it recognized the acknowledgement. "I appreciate your willingness to meet," Lucius said. He set his cane against the table, an elegant gesture, precisely calculated. "Given recent events, I thought it important that we speak directly. The Malfoy family is among those affected by this situation, and, the Malfoy family is on page 31, Harry said. Lucius paused. "I beg your pardon. Of the list of affected families. Page 31. He looked at Lucius evenly. "I've read all 47 pages. I know where everyone is." The solicitor had stopped opening the briefcase. Lucius recovered smoothly. He was good at recovering smoothly, Mira noticed. It was practically a physical skill. "Yes. Which is why I'm here. The Malfoy inheritance that was misappropriated, is being restored," Harry said. "Along with everyone else's. That's not a question. Ragnarok's team has been working on the restoration process since Tuesday. You didn't need to come here for that." A pause. Something moved through Lucius's eyes, a recalculation, a new angle being considered. "I came because I believe our interests align," he said. "You are pursuing accountability for what Dumbledore did. So is the Malfoy family. We have resources, legal, political, social, that could support your position significantly. What do you want for those resources? Lucius smiled. It was the smile of someone who appreciated directness because they were very good at responding to it. Alignment, he said. When the Wisengamot debates this case, and it will, extensively, having the Malfoy family vocally supporting your claims carries weight. My family has relationships that the Ministry listens to. The Ministry listens to you, Harry said, because you give them money. The silence was brief and pointed. That is a cynical view of political relationships, Lucius said, pleasantly. Is it wrong? Lucius looked at him with those pale eyes. He was, Mira thought, genuinely uncertain how to handle this, which was probably a novel experience for him. He was used to children who were either impressionable or obedient. Harry was neither. What I'm offering, Lucius said, shifting slightly, is practical support for a legitimate legal cause. The Malfoy family does not take positions lightly. Our endorsement carries. I don't need your endorsement, Harry said. The Wisengamot already passed a resolution recognizing my legal standing. Amelia Bones is running the investigation with full authorization. Gringotts is the most credible financial institution in Britain. What exactly would your endorsement add that isn't already there? Lucius's pleasant expression held, but something behind it was doing rapid arithmetic. Political cover, he said, dropping the smoothness slightly, going for a different register. There are members of the Wisengamot who will look for reasons to minimize this case. To call it a misunderstanding, as I imagine you've heard. My family's support makes that argument harder. I know, Harry said. I know that's true. And I'm not saying I don't understand the offer. He looked at Lucius directly. I'm saying that when you support something publicly, it becomes associated with you. And I don't want what happened to those families to become a Malfoy cause. The room was very quiet. Because, Harry continued, carefully, the Malfoy family's politics are not the politics of those families. The Pruitts died in the war. Neville Longbottom's parents are in St. Mungo's. Mary Perkins is Muggle-born. The families on that list are not a natural constituency for the Malfoy family, and if you stand in front of the Wisengamot and speak for them, the people who want to minimize this case are going to spend all their time talking about you instead of listening to what happened. He paused. I think you're smart enough to know that too. Lucius was quiet. Narcissa, who had not spoken yet, looked at Harry with an expression that was no longer doing the careful nothing of earlier. It was doing something else now. Something that might have been respect, if it was filtered through a personality that expressed respect the way a very still lake expresses depth. So, Lucius said. You're refusing. I'm explaining why your offer doesn't work, Harry said. That's different. The distinction escapes me. If I refused, Harry said, I'd just say no. I'm telling you why, which means I think you're capable of understanding the reason, which is more than a refusal. He looked at Lucius steadily. Your family lost something. That's real. Gringotts is restoring it. You don't owe me anything and I don't owe you anything. We're square. Lucius looked at him for a long time. The solicitor had given up entirely on the briefcase and was sitting with his hands in his lap. Then Lucius Malfoy said, in a voice that had had most of its professional texture stripped out of it, you are 6 years old. Yes, Harry said. Where did you learn to do that? Harry's expression did something brief and honest. I lived with people who didn't think I mattered, he said. I learned to pay attention to what people wanted so I could see it coming. I pay attention to that differently now. Something crossed Lucius's face. It was gone quickly, but it had been there, something that might, in a different light, have looked like recognition. He picked up his cane, stood, and looked at Harry with those pale calculated eyes. Then he looked at Narcissa. And that was when Narcissa spoke. I'd like a moment, she said. With Mr. Potter. Alone. Lucius looked at her. 10 minutes, she said, pleasantly, with the particular pleasantness of someone who is not actually asking. The thing about Narcissa Malfoy, Mira had heard from people who'd had the experience of watching her operate, was that she appeared decorative until the moment she wasn't. She had the quality of still water that turned out to be deep and cold and had a strong current. Lucius looked at her for a moment with the expression of a man who has learned, over many years, that this particular expression on this particular woman's face meant she had already decided. He nodded. He picked up his cane and walked out. The solicitor scrambled after him. Ragnarok, from the head of the table, looked at Narcissa, and then at Harry, and then stood without comment and left the room. Sharpclaw followed. Mira stayed. Narcissa glanced at her, not objecting, just noting. "You can stay," Harry said to Mira. Then he looked at Narcissa. "What did you want to say?" Narcissa looked at him for a moment without speaking. She was, up close, a woman whose beauty had a kind of structural quality to it, bone deep, maintained not through effort but through some fundamental architecture of her face. Her eyes were pale like Lucius's but different in quality, his were calculating, hers were watching. "I wanted to apologize," she said. Harry blinked. Of all the things he'd expected from this conversation, that wasn't on the list. "For what?" he said. "For not acting sooner." She held his gaze without flinching. "I knew Dumbledore placed you with Muggles. I knew the house, I knew the wards. I didn't know about the suppression or the financial scheme, those I genuinely didn't know. But I knew you were with people who didn't want you, and I didn't do anything about it." "Why not?" he asked. He asked it without accusation, just genuinely wanting to know. She was quiet for a moment. "Because I told myself it wasn't my business," she said. "Because my family's position was complicated. Because acting would have drawn attention I didn't want. Because Dumbledore was, Dumbledore, and you questioned him at your peril." She paused. "None of those are good reasons. They're true, but they're not good." Harry looked at her. "I also," she said, "didn't think about you as a person. I thought about you as a situation. A political variable. Something Dumbledore had managed. And whatever I thought about Dumbledore's politics, I assumed his management of you was," she stopped. "I assumed it was fine. I didn't look." "A lot of people didn't look," Harry said. "Yes," she said. "But some people were better positioned to look than others." She looked at her hands briefly, then back at him. "My son is about a year older than you. Draco. I looked at him this morning, at breakfast, before I came here, and I thought, what if someone had decided Draco was a political variable and arranged him accordingly?" She paused. "I'm sorry. That's all I came to say." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at her with those green eyes, Lily's eyes, Mira thought again, and there was something working behind them, something private, and then he said, "Did you mean what you said, or is this a different kind of offer from your husband's?" She met his gaze. "I meant it." "All right," he said. She looked at him steadily. "That's it? What else should there be? You said you were sorry. I believe you. We can move on." He paused. "Unless you wanted something from me." "No," she said. "I don't want anything from you." "Then we're fine." She looked at him for another moment and then said, quietly, "You're going to have a complicated life, Mr. Potter." "I think it started complicated," he said. "I'm just catching up to it." She stood, smoothed her robes, and paused at the door. "Draco," she said, without turning. "He's difficult. He's been told things that are, not useful to him. But he's not a bad child." She paused. "When you go to school, give him a chance, if he'll take it." Harry said nothing for a moment. "Then, I'll give anyone a chance who doesn't make me regret it." She nodded once and left. The room was quiet. Mira let it be quiet for a moment before she said anything. "Are you all right?" she asked. "Yes," Harry said. She was telling the truth. I thought so too. He looked at the door. Lucius wasn't. No, she agreed. Not entirely. He wanted something I didn't see the shape of yet. He frowned. The Wiesengemot governance. The thing he filed about Hogwarts. He wants the school restructured with reduced headmaster authority, which means the board gets more power, which means he gets more power. He looked at Mira. He was hoping I'd give him credibility for that by associating with him. So when he pushed for governance changes, he could frame them as being in my interest. That's what I thought, Mira said. But Narcissa wasn't part of it. He looked at the door again. She came separately. She had a different reason entirely. She's more complicated than he is, Mira said carefully. She's more honest than he is, Harry said. That's not the same as complicated. He picked up his water and drank, and then he said, "Tell me about Hogwarts." She blinked at the shift. What about it? I'll go. When I'm 11. But I need to understand what it is before then. Ragnarok said there are 5 years of schooling I've missed, not Hogwarts, the foundational things. Magic theory, history, practice. He said Gringotts can arrange tutors. He told me the same thing this morning, Mira said. I want to start immediately. He said it without drama, just deciding. Not because I'm worried about being behind. But because I've spent 5 years not learning anything I was supposed to learn, and I'm angry about that, and the best thing I can do with that anger is use it for something. He paused. Is that too young to start formal training? She looked at him. The Gringotts standards say 8. For formal curriculum. And informal? No lower limit, she said. Then informal, he said. For now. Magic theory, history, reading. And the wandless practice, Gripholt said I was already doing it. I'd rather do it on purpose. Mira nodded slowly. I'll talk to the education department. Today. Today, she agreed. What she hadn't anticipated was that the education department would send, the following morning, not one tutor but 3, a retired magical theorist named Professor Aldrich Voss, who was 70 and looked like he'd been carved from the same material as the bank walls, a magical history specialist named Cyril Webb, who was 30 and had the energetic precision of someone who genuinely loved her subject, and an elemental magic practitioner named Tobias Flint, no relation to the Flints of Slytherin, who had the compact, deliberate energy of someone who did magic the way athletes ran, with total focus and no wasted motion. Harry was sitting at the table when they arrived, with breakfast half finished and a book on basic magical theory open in front of him. He'd been reading it since 6. Voss looked at the book. You've already started. Chapter 4, Harry said. Voss looked at Cyril Webb. She looked at Tobias Flint. Flint looked at Harry with the assessing gaze of a practitioner. Put the book down, Flint said. Harry put the book down. Hold out your right hand, palm up. Harry held out his hand. Think of something you want. Harry thought about the window, the enchanted one, showing the Scottish Highlands. He thought about the way the mist moved over it in the mornings, the way the light shifted, and he thought, with the specific directness of someone who had been told he was already doing this, I want to feel the wind. A current of air moved across his open palm. Gentle, distinct, unmistakable. Coming from nowhere. Flint looked at him for a long moment. Right, he said. We're starting from scratch. Not because you don't know anything. But because what you know, you learned wrong. We're going to build it properly. All right, Harry said. Voss set his bag down and pulled out 3 textbooks that were significantly more dense than the one Harry had been reading. Cyril Webb unrolled a long timeline that she pinned to the wall with a charm. Flint cleared the center of the room and said, We'll do theory in the morning and practice in the afternoon. Questions at any time, we don't do the raising your hand thing, we're not that formal. Harry looked at the timeline, the books, the cleared space. Something moved through him that Mira watched carefully. Joy, she thought. It was straightforward, uncomplicated joy. The joy of someone who'd spent 5 years being told to be smaller, discovering that being larger was not just permitted but actively, enthusiastically facilitated. "What's the first thing?" he asked. "The first thing," Voss said, dropping into his chair with the ease of someone who'd sat in 1,000 teaching chairs, "is that everything you've ever heard about magic being exceptional, rare, and mysterious is marketing. Magic is a language. It has grammar. It has rules. It has idioms and it has dialects and it has archaic forms that some people still use because they learn from people who were taught by people who, you understand. We're going to learn the grammar. Then you can speak the language however you like." Harry's eyes were bright. "Okay. Lily Evans," Cyril Webb said from the wall, where she was pointing at something on the timeline, "your mother, was one of the better magical theorists of her year group. Not because she was unusually powerful, though she was, but because she understood the grammar very early. You have her blood. That's not a guarantee of anything, but it's a starting point." She looked at him. "Any questions before we begin? How far back does the timeline go?" 12,000 years. "Start at the beginning," Harry said. Webb smiled, the smile of someone who had been asked this question and found it the right one, and pointed to the earliest mark on the timeline. The days took on a rhythm. Mornings were Voss and Webb, theory and history, alternating, sometimes blurring together because Voss had the teaching habit of making theory immediate and personal. He didn't lecture in the abstract. He found the concrete case, the specific moment, the individual whose life illustrated the principle. Harry absorbed it with the focus of someone who had spent years with too little to pay attention to and was making up for it. Afternoons were Flint. The practice sessions were in the cleared room, which expanded through a spatial charm to something larger than it looked. Flint was a practitioner first and had strong opinions about having enough space to work. He was not gentle about Harry's mistakes. He was not unkind either, but he corrected with precision and didn't repeat himself, which meant that Harry had to listen the first time. Harry's wandless magic was already more consistent than it had any right to be for someone 6 days out of a suppression. Small things, temperature, air, light. He could dim a torch from across the room by the end of the first week. He could call water from a jug to his cup. Not always on the first attempt, but consistently enough that Flint moved him forward. "You're not doing what most students do," Flint said on the 4th afternoon, watching Harry move a stack of parchment from one end of the room to the other without touching it. "What do most students do?" Harry asked. "They push. They try to force it." He walked around Harry, looking at his posture, his hands. "You ask. It's a very different mechanism and most people never find it. They learn the push and they get decent results and they stop looking." He stopped in front of him. "Who taught you to ask?" "No one," Harry said. "It's just what felt right." Flint looked at him with the evaluating stillness of someone recalibrating. "The Peveril trait," he said, more to himself than to Harry. "Gripholt mentioned that," Harry said. "Innate persuasion of reality. It's rarer than people think. Most of the people who had it died out or diluted through the generations." He looked at Harry. "You have it double. Have you noticed that the magic responds faster when you're calm?" "Yes. That's the persuasion mechanism. Fear tightens it. Calm opens it. Most magic works the other way, adrenaline helps with power bursts. Your kind of magic is different. It's relational." He paused. "It means in a crisis, you need to be calmer than the situation. That's a skill. We're going to work on it." "How?" "By making you uncomfortable," Flint said, with professional serenity, "and teaching you to stay calm anyway." He was not wrong that it was uncomfortable. But Harry, who had spent 5 years being uncomfortable with no instruction and no purpose, found it straightforward. The discomfort had a point now. The discomfort was building something. The news from outside arrived in pieces. Dumbledore had been located in France, then had moved to Italy. The ICW had issued an extradition request. The Italian ministry was cooperating, the French ministry was being careful, which meant in practice that they were being slow, which meant in practice that people who wanted Dumbledore to have time to arrange things were giving him time. Amelia sent updates through official channels. Harry read them at dinner. The Wysinghamot had voted to establish a formal inquiry committee, 9 members, chaired by Marchbanks, which was the best possible outcome of that particular vote. The inquiry had subpoena authority over ministry records going back to 1980. For more families from the list had come forward with additional information, secondary thefts, smaller redirections that hadn't been in the original audit. Ragnarok's team was expanding the investigation. The number 3,100 had grown to 3,112. Harry added the 12 names to his list by hand, at the bottom of the last page. The Pruitt restoration had been completed, Molly Weasley had received confirmation by Owl. Harry knew this because Ragnarok told him and because, the following morning, there was a letter addressed to him on his breakfast table in handwriting that was round and warm and slightly urgent, the way people's handwriting was when they were writing something they felt strongly about and were going quickly. Dear Mr. Potter, I don't know if this is the right thing to do but I had to write. I received the bank's letter about my brother's inheritance and what had happened to it, and I cried for quite a long time because I had given up thinking about it years ago. To find out it's been there, waiting, I have 6 sons and we make do but school things have always been, it's always been a stretch. And to know that Gideon and Fabian's money is going to help pay for their school things, it feels like my brothers are helping still. Like they're still here in that way. I hope you're being looked after properly. You deserve to be. I know you were only a baby when all this started and none of it is your fault. You sound like a remarkable boy from what I've read in the papers. With gratitude, Molly Weasley P.S. If you ever need a home-cooked meal, you are welcome at the Burrow. I know that might seem odd from a stranger but the offer is genuine. Harry read it twice. Then he read it again. Then he folded it very carefully and put it in his robe. He wrote back that afternoon, after his session with Flint, sitting at the table with his dinner going warm beside him. Dear Mrs. Weasley, thank you for writing. I'm glad your brother's money is going somewhere useful. I read about them in the audit, the bank's records describe them as having died bravely, which I think is true from what I can find in the history books. I am being looked after. Mira is my healer and she's very good. I have tutors. I have proper food and rooms and a window that shows the Scottish Highlands. I would like to take you up on the meal sometime, if that's still all right. Not now because things are complicated right now, but sometime. It's a kind offer. Yours, Harry Potter. He sealed it and sent it and felt something settle that he hadn't known was unsettled. It was Narcissa who brought the thing that changed the week's rhythm. She came alone this time, no Lucius, no solicitor. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon with a folder of documents and the particular posture of someone who had made a decision they weren't entirely comfortable with and had decided to follow through anyway. Ragnarok had let her in with the minimal expression of someone who found her interesting in the way that complex variables are interesting. He sat in on the meeting himself, which said something. I found something, Narcissa said, without preamble, sitting across from Harry. In Lucius's correspondence files. I want to be clear that I found it looking for something else entirely, and that what I do with it is my decision, not his. She opened the folder. Harry looked at her. What is it? Letters, she said. Between Lucius and Dumbledore. From 1981 and 1982. She slid them across the table. Lucius knew about the vault redirections. Not the full scope, I don't think he knew about 3,000 families. But he knew about yours. He knew your parents' estate was being restructured and he didn't object, because at the time he thought, she stopped. He thought Dumbledore's management of you was prudent. Keeping you away from the wizarding world was something Lucius agreed with. You were a potential disruption. Harry looked at the letters without touching them. He's not going to offer these voluntarily, she said. I know that. I also know that withholding them from an active criminal investigation is a legal problem, which is why I'm bringing them here. She looked at Harry. And because I came here last week and said I was sorry I hadn't looked. This is me looking. Ragnock reached across and took the letters. He read them with the focused efficiency of someone who read documents the way other people breathed. These extend the investigation to Lucius Malfoy, he said. Yes, Narcissa said. You understand what that means for your family. I understand what it means, she said, evenly. Harry had been watching her. He's going to be furious with you, he said. Yes. She didn't look away. Are you safe? The question seemed to surprise her. Something moved through her composed face, surprise, and then something softer, the expression of someone who hadn't expected to be asked that and found it mattered more than they'd anticipated. I'll manage, she said. That's not what I asked. She looked at him for a moment. I have family I can go to if needed, she said. My sister. Andromeda, Harry said immediately. She looked mildly startled. You know her. She was in the first group of families I met. She brought Tonks. The pink hair. Something shifted in Narcissa's face, something private and complicated and too layered to read quickly. Nymphadora, she said. She's been that way since she was 2. Her hair. She paused. I haven't, Andromeda, and I don't, she stopped. You don't talk, Harry said. Not for years. But you could. She looked at him. He was watching her with those steady green eyes that had the quality of seeing things clearly without making them worse. Probably, she said. You should, he said. Before things get complicated. Before Lucius finds out about the letters and you need somewhere to go. You should talk to her now, while it's a choice and not a necessity. He paused. That's my opinion. You don't have to take it. She was quiet for a long moment. You are the strangest 6-year-old I have ever encountered, she said. I've had an unusual week, he said. She looked at the folder, at the letters that Ragnock was now reading carefully, and then back at Harry. When this is over, she said, carefully, and it will eventually be over, when the investigation closes and the Wizengamot finishes and Dumbledore is dealt with and you're just, a boy again, or as much of one as you can manage, yes, he said. I'd like Draco to meet you properly. Not through this. Not through politics or cases or, just as boys. She paused. If that's something you'd consider. Harry thought about Molly Weasley's letter. About the meal at the Burrow she'd offered. About Neville Longbottom trying not to cry in a conference room, and Tonks's pink hair, and the 40 names he'd read in the Wizengamot. He was building something, he realized. Not deliberately, not with strategy, but it was happening anyway. People were arriving in his life like pieces of a thing that wanted to be built. Yes, he said. I'd consider that. Narcissa stood. She paused at the door the way she had the last time, and this time she looked back. One more thing, she said. Lucius knows where Dumbledore is. The room went very still. Not officially, she said. Not documented. But he knows. They've been in contact. She looked at Ragnock. I don't have proof. But I know my husband. He knows. She left. Ragnock sat for a moment with the letters in his hands and the stillness of someone adding a new column to a very long calculation. Then he looked at Harry. Bones needs to know this today, Harry said. Yes, Ragnock agreed. And Lucius Malfoy, Harry said, is going to find out his wife came here. When he does, he's going to try to discredit her. Preemptively. Yes, Ragnock said again. So Amelia needs the letters before end of business today. And Narcissa needs to be somewhere Lucius can't reach her before he finds out. He looked at Ragnock. Can Gringotts can extend its protection to a voluntary witness, Ragnock said. Under the Accords. If she chooses to request it. Harry stood up and went to the door. He found the goblin clerk in the corridor and said, "Can you catch Mrs. Malfoy before she leaves the building? Tell her that Director Ragnarok has something to discuss with her." The clerk moved. Mira, who had been sitting through the whole meeting with her tea and her notebook, looked at Harry as he came back in. "You're not even breathing hard," she said. "Should I be?" Most adults, after what just happened in this room, would need a moment. Harry sat down. He picked up his water. "There'll be time for moments later," he said. "Right now Amelia needs letters and Narcissa needs protection and Lucius needs not to know any of it yet." He drank. "Can we get Amelia here this afternoon?" "I'll send a message," Mira said. "Thank you." He put the water down and looked at the door through which Narcissa had just left and thought about two sisters who hadn't spoken in years and a pink-haired girl who turned gold when she was happy. "Mira," he said. "Yes." "When this is quieter. Can we invite Tonks to come visit? Not for anything official. Just to visit." She looked at him, this small, extraordinary boy who'd had no one a week ago and was carefully, deliberately building a world of people worth having. "Yes," she said. "I think we can arrange that." He nodded, satisfied, and went to wait for Narcissa to come back. Chapter 5, The Education of Harry Potter. 3 weeks after Harry Potter arrived at Gringotts, Tobias Flint told him to stand in the middle of the practice room and not move. Harry stood in the middle of the practice room and did not move. Flint walked around him in a slow circle, hands behind his back, with the expression of someone reading something complicated written in very small print. He stopped in front of Harry and said, "Yesterday you dimmed every torch in this corridor simultaneously without meaning to. What were you thinking about?" "The list," Harry said. "Specifically. The Fenwick entry. Edmund Fenwick. He died before the money transferred and it moved anyway. I was thinking about how someone could look at that and decide it was just an account entry. That he stopped being a person and became a figure in a ledger." He paused. "I was angry." "I know you were angry," Flint said. The temperature in the corridor dropped 4 degrees. "What I want you to understand is that you did that. Not a surge, not an accident in the way children accidentally levitate toys. You pulled ambient magic from a 100-foot radius and redirected it through an emotional impulse. Do you understand how unusual that is?" Gripholt said I was in the 98th percentile. "Gripholt measured your core," Flint said. "Your core is impressive. What I'm talking about is different. What I'm talking about is reach. The ability to touch magic at a distance, to draw it, to redirect it. Most practitioners can't do this at all. The ones who can spend years developing it deliberately." He looked at Harry. "You did it by accident while thinking about something sad." Harry thought about that. "Is it dangerous?" "Not inherently. Uncontrolled, yes. Which is what we're working on." Flint moved to the edge of the room where he'd set up a row of stone blocks on a shelf, each one about the size of a fist. "The technique I'm going to show you is called anchoring. It's not in the standard curriculum, it's a goblin-developed method and most human practitioners don't learn it because most human practitioners don't need it. You need it. What does it do? Gives your magic a resting position. Somewhere to sit when you're not using it. So instead of ambient emotion pulling it in whatever direction feels most urgent, it stays here." He tapped his own sternum. "Until you choose to move it. How long does it take to learn? Most adults who get to this method, years. With your Peveril mechanism, probably faster." He looked at Harry with the directness that Mira had come to understand was his version of care, not gentle, but honest, and honesty was its own form of care. "This is going to be deeply frustrating for a while. Your instinct is to ask the magic. The anchor changes the relationship slightly, it's less about asking and more about placing. You're going to feel like you're constraining it." "I grew up constrained," Harry said. Flint looked at him for a moment. Then he said, simply, "Yes. You did. This is different, you're doing the constraining, on purpose, for your own reasons. That changes what it feels like. He was right that it was frustrating. He was also right that it was different. The first 3 days of anchoring practice produced results that ranged from nothing to almost a close but not quite, and Harry sat with it in the evenings in his rooms, not frustrated, exactly, but chewing on it the way he chewed on everything, turning it over. By the 4th day he understood what Flint meant about placing versus asking, and on the morning of the 5th day he sat down cross-legged in the practice room before Flint arrived and settled his magic deliberately into his chest, feeling it sit still for the first time like a fire in a hearth rather than a fire in a field. Flint walked in at 9 o'clock and stopped. "You did it," he said. "This morning," Harry said. "It took me a while to figure out that I was thinking about it wrong. I kept trying to build a container. But it's not a container. It's more like," he searched for the word. "An agreement." Flint sat down across from him and looked at him with the expression that meant he was recalibrating again. He did this regularly. Harry had stopped noticing it. "Say that again," Flint said. "I kept thinking about containing the magic. Holding it in a specific place by force. But that's the wrong model. You said it's not a constraint, it's a resting position. So I thought about what resting actually means, and resting isn't being held down, it's choosing to be still." He opened his hands. "The magic doesn't sit in my chest because I put it there. It sits there because I asked it to stay and it agreed." Flint was quiet. "Is that wrong?" Harry asked. "No," Flint said. "That's the Peveril mechanism. Most people who reach anchoring at all reach it as a construct, they build the container and maintain it through effort. What you just described is the inherent version. It's self-maintaining." "What does that mean practically?" "It means," Flint said, "that your anchor doesn't cost you anything. Most practitioners who anchor spend a baseline of magical energy maintaining it constantly. You spend nothing. It's just, how you are now." He looked at Harry with something that was, for Tobias Flint, quite close to awe. "We should test it." He spent the next hour doing everything he could think of to disturb it. He made loud noises, he created sudden flashes of light, he did a sequence of increasingly alarming things with the stone blocks, shattering them, launching them, setting one briefly on fire, and Harry sat in the middle of the room and felt the magic stay where he'd placed it, easy and still, until he chose to move it. Then Flint said, quietly, "Think about the Fenwick entry." Harry thought about Edmund Fenwick. He let himself think about it fully, the man who'd died, the money that had moved anyway, the account entry where a person used to be. The torches didn't dim. The temperature held. The magic sat in his chest, warm and still, steady as a coal. "Good," Flint said, and it meant more than the word. The mornings remained Voss and Webb, and they were, in their own way, as important. Voss had the teaching instinct of someone who understood that knowledge was not separate from the person learning it. He didn't just explain magical theory, he connected it. He found the places where the abstract principle touched something real, something Harry already knew, and he built from there. They were 3 weeks into the theoretical curriculum when Voss arrived one morning and didn't unpack his books. He sat down across from Harry and said, "I want to ask you something before we start." Harry looked up from the breakfast he'd been finishing. "You've read everything I've given you," Voss said. "You ask good questions. You connect things quickly." He paused. "What do you want to do with magic?" "Not what you want to do with your life, that's too large a question for a Tuesday morning. What do you want to do with the magic specifically?" Harry thought about it. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "That's fine," Voss said. "Let me rephrase. What have you noticed about your own magic? What does it feel like it wants to do?" The question was different and Harry turned it over. "It feels structural," he said after a moment. "Like it's interested in the way things are built. When I'm doing the wandless work with Flint, the things that come easiest are the ones where I'm changing a relationship between things rather than just moving them. Like, the air current I made in the first session, I wasn't pushing air. I was changing the relationship between the warm air and the cold air, and the current came from that. He paused. Does that make sense? Perfectly, Boss said, and there was something satisfied in his voice. That's structural magic. It's one of the oldest disciplines and one of the least taught, because it's difficult to codify. It's not a spell list or a technique set, it's a way of perceiving. Practitioners who have it naturally are rare. The historical examples include, he looked at Webb, who was already at the timeline, pointing. Merlin, she said from the wall. Definitely. The architectural changes at Hogwarts attributed to the founders show structural magic signatures. She moved her finger along the timeline. Rowena Ravenclaw, almost certainly. Her enchantments on the castle don't work by force, they work by changing what the space believes it is. She turned around. Your mother. Lily Evans. Her thesis at Hogwarts, unpublished, but referenced in 2 later papers, was on structural charm theory. The idea that charms don't force objects to change, they change the object's relationship with its own nature. Harry was very still. You have her line of thinking, Boss said, not gently but with the warmth of someone delivering something true. The way you described the air current is almost exactly the language she used in those references. Same mechanism. Same instinct. Harry looked at his hands. That's not a coincidence, Boss continued. The Peveril double inheritance on your father's side is primarily about reach and depth, the scale of what you can touch. Your mother's line is about precision. About relationship. You have both. He paused. Which means in theory you can reach very far and change things very precisely. That is an exceptional combination. What can I do with it? Harry asked. His voice was even but his eyes were bright. Right now. Small things, precisely. Later, theoretically, nothing is off the table. Structural magic at full development can do things that other magic can't approach. It can change what a space is, what an object believes itself to be, what a connection between things means. He looked at Harry. It can also undo magic. Very old magic. Complicated magic. Magic that was put in place by force can be undone by someone who understands the relationship it's built on. Harry looked at him. Like the suppression ward, he said. Like the suppression ward, Boss confirmed. Though that's already handled. But other ones, Harry said. If there are other places where someone's put in magic like that, yes, Boss said. Eventually. We're not there yet. We're at the understanding what air is stage. But the trajectory is clear. He picked up his books. Today we're doing the history of structural magic practice, because you need the vocabulary before you can use the concept. Ready? Yes, Harry said. He was already pulling his parchment toward him. Start at the beginning. You always say that, Webb said, with the smile of someone who genuinely enjoyed the instruction. I mean it every time, Harry said. News arrived mid-morning on a Thursday that changed the temperature of everything. Amelia's message came through Ragnarok, terse, official, the language of someone writing fast in the middle of a situation. Dumbledore had crossed back into Britain. Not legally, not through any documented channel, but the border monitoring charms at Dover had flagged a magical signature of unusual strength at 4 in the morning, and Amelia's aurors were 90% certain it was him. He was back. Nobody knew where. Nobody knew why now, after 3 weeks of successful evasion. Ragnarok came to Harry's morning session personally, which meant the tutors paused and cleared out with the professional discretion of people who understood the hierarchy of urgency. Harry looked at Ragnarok's face when he came in and said, "He's back in Britain." "Yes," Ragnarok said. "Do we know why?" "Several possibilities. He may have decided that running is worse than confronting the situation, that a negotiated resolution serves him better than an extradition proceeding that he doesn't control." Ragnarok sat down. He may have come back for something specific. There are things in Britain that he would want, documents, items, connections. Things he couldn't access from abroad. What things? Harry asked. His personal vault is frozen, Ragnock said. But there are objects that were not in the vault at the time of freezing. Items he kept elsewhere. Gringotts intelligence has identified at least 3 locations where Dumbledore stored materials outside the bank system. He paused. There is also the matter of Hogwarts. McGonagall is running Hogwarts, Harry said. Yes. But there are things at Hogwarts that are Dumbledore's in ways that go beyond tenure. He has been headmaster for nearly 40 years. There are protections in that castle that know him specifically. He could access areas that McGonagall cannot. Harry thought about this. Can the school be secured? McGonagall has been notified. She is competent and loyal to the students, I believe she will act appropriately. Ragnock looked at Harry. The more pressing question is whether Dumbledore's return is a threat to you specifically. Is it? Unknown. He knows you are here, that is obvious. What he intends, Ragnock made a small gesture. He does not operate in straight lines. Harry was quiet for a moment, thinking. He came back because something changed, he said. 3 weeks ago he ran rather than face the investigation. He would have known the investigation was continuing, he would have been watching. So what changed in the last week that made staying away worse than coming back? Ragnock looked at him steadily. The Malfoy letters, Harry said. Narcissa gave us the letters proving Lucius knew about the redirection. Lucius has been cooperating quietly with Dumbledore from a distance. When Narcissa came here, when the letters went to Amelia, Lucius loses his protected position. He's now a suspect, not an ally. He worked through it. So Dumbledore has lost his political cover in Britain. The people who might have helped manage his situation are now managing their own. Coming back and trying to negotiate is better than being extradited from Italy with nobody left who'll speak for him. Ragnock said nothing for a moment. He's going to try to reach me, Harry said. That is my concern, yes. He'll want to explain himself. Frame it as being for my protection. Make me sympathetic. Harry paused. He'll be very good at it. He is one of the most persuasive human beings alive, Ragnock said flatly. He has spent 70 years convincing people that his perspective is the only reasonable one. He does not do this through manipulation in the crude sense. He does it through genuine intelligence and apparent care and the very effective technique of making you feel, when you are in his presence, that he understands you better than anyone. He looked at Harry. I am warning you because I believe you should know. Not because I think you are easily manipulated. I know, Harry said. I'll listen to what he says. He met Ragnock's eyes. And then I'll say what I think. Ragnock nodded once and left. Harry sat for a moment with the morning's interrupted lesson in front of him, the history of structural magic, Voss's careful notes in the margin of the text. He looked at the timeline on the wall, at Webb's mark stretching back 12,000 years, at the long human effort of understanding magic and building from that understanding. He thought about Dumbledore coming back, and he thought about 3,100 families, and he thought about Edmund Fenwick who stopped being a person and became an account entry. He picked up his quill and went back to his notes. There was still an afternoon session with Flint. Tonks came to visit on Friday. She arrived with her mother and immediately, upon entering Harry's rooms, turned her hair from pink to a very alarming shade of orange-red, as though auditioning different options. She had the restless, kinetic quality of someone for whom sitting still was a theoretical concept. Your window shows Scotland, she announced, having walked to it immediately. It does, Harry confirmed. Why Scotland? I think it's where the charm was calibrated. It might have been whoever set it up was from there. She pressed her nose against the glass. Can you change it to show somewhere else? I haven't tried, Harry said. She turned around with the expression of someone who found this an obvious next step. Try. Harry looked at the window. He thought about what Flint had said about relationship and what Voss had said about structural magic and what his own magic felt like when it was interested, when it leaned forward, the way it did now, towards something that felt like a puzzle. He looked at the window and thought about what it was, not a window to Scotland, but a window to a place. A relationship between this room and somewhere else. And if the relationship was changeable, then, the mist over the highlands dissolved. There was a flicker, and then the view showed sunrise over the sea, the Atlantic, probably, the quality of the light suggesting something west of Britain. Gold and enormous and immediate. Tonks made a sound of pure delight. You did it. Apparently, Harry said, slightly surprised. Andromeda came to stand beside her daughter and looked at the ocean. She was quiet for a moment. Your mother could do things like that, she said. Not the same thing exactly. But the same quality of, adjusting what was already there. She looked at Harry. Have your tutors said anything about it? Structural magic, he said. Voss says I have her line of thinking. Andromeda was quiet for a moment and then nodded, and the nod had something in it that was private and warm. Tonks had pulled Harry by the sleeve to the table where his practice materials were laid out, a set of small objects Flint used for session work. She picked up a smooth river stone and said, What can you do with this? Right now. Move it. Change its temperature. If I concentrate, change what it thinks it is. Her eyes went wide. What does that mean? Structural magic. You can change the relationship between an object and its own nature. So a stone that believes itself to be heavy could be persuaded that it's light. He paused. I can't do it for long yet. And it reverts when I stop concentrating. Can you do it now? He picked up the stone. It sat in his palm, cool and dense. He thought about its weight, not as a property it had but as a relationship it held, with gravity, with its own mass, and he asked, politely, if that relationship wanted to change. The stone floated off his palm. Tonks grabbed her mother's arm. Mum, I see it, Andromeda said, watching the stone. That's not normal levitation, is it? Tonks said, staring. Normal levitation you can see the magic doing the lifting. That one, it lifted itself, Harry said. The stone drifted slowly upward. The magic isn't holding it up. The stone's just, not heavy right now. He let the relationship settle back. The stone dropped into his palm with a faint click. Tonks stared at him. That's the most brilliant thing I've ever seen, she said. Teach me. Nymphadora, Andromeda said. Tonks, she corrected automatically, still staring at Harry. You have your own gift, her mother said. You don't need to acquire everyone else's. I don't want to acquire it, I want to understand it. She looked at Harry with the intense intellectual appetite of someone who had decided this was interesting and therefore it was going to be very thoroughly explored. Does it work on anything? Could you do it to a person? Harry looked at the stone in his hand. He thought about it honestly. I don't know, he said. I haven't tried anything that complex. And I think changing what a person believes they are is different from a stone. He paused. More complicated. More responsibility. Tonks thought about that. Because people have more at stake in what they are. Yes, Harry said. She nodded, satisfied, and helped herself to a biscuit from the tea tray. I think you should come to Hogwarts, she said. When you're old enough. The school needs someone who thinks like that. Most of the students just do what the spells say. I'll go when I'm 11, Harry said. That's 5 years. I know. You'll be so far ahead by then, she said, with cheerful certainty. They won't know what to do with you. They already don't, Mira said from the doorway, which made Tonks laugh and Harry smile and Andromeda look at Mira with the warm, dry expression of someone who appreciated accuracy. Flint found something in the third week that changed the afternoon sessions entirely. It happened on a Tuesday, during a standard reach exercise. Harry was working on extending the range of his anchor, testing how far he could push precise wandless work before the quality degraded. He'd been holding a set of objects in stable positions across the practice room, stone, metal, glass, wood, when Flint set down a new object in the center, a small, ordinary clay pot. "What's different about that?" Flint asked. Harry looked at it. He reached with the structural perception, the way Voss had been teaching him to look, and felt something. "It's been broken," he said. "And repaired. There's a seam in it, very old. Someone used a charm to fuse the pieces, but the clay's memory of being broken is still in it." He looked at Flint. "Like a scar." Flint looked satisfied. "Most practitioners can't feel that at this range without a wand. What you're sensing is the magical history of the object, the residual signature of the charm, yes, but also the structural stress in the clay itself. The places where it was broken still have a different relationship with their own integrity than the parts that were never broken." He paused. "Can you change that?" Harry looked at the pot. He thought about what it would mean to change it, not the surface, not the visual scar, but the memory of being broken. The relationship the clay had with its own wholeness. He tried. It took him 40 minutes. It was the most concentrated work he'd done yet, and at the end of it his hands were shaking slightly and he was hungry in the bone-deep way of someone who'd spent serious energy. But when he set the pot down and Flint picked it up and ran a diagnostic over it, "There's no seam," Flint said quietly. "No residual charm signature. No structural stress." He turned the pot over in his hands. "In every measurable sense, this pot has never been broken." Harry drank the water Flint handed him in one long go. "That is," Flint said, with the careful precision of someone who did not use words carelessly, "a healing function. Not biological, you didn't repair tissue, you repaired matter and magical memory. But the mechanism is the same as the highest level healing magic." He set the pot down and looked at Harry. "What you just did, most trained healers cannot do with a wand and 30 years of practice." "I'm very tired," Harry said. "You used too much," Flint said. "That's the next lesson, efficiency. Not just what you can do but what it costs and how to spend less of it." He looked at Harry steadily. "But I want you to understand something first. What you showed me just now, I've been practicing for 22 years. I have never been able to do that." Harry looked at the pot sitting on the table, ordinary and unblemished. "The pot doesn't know it was ever broken." "No. That's strange," Harry said. "I was thinking, while I was doing it, is it wrong to change what something remembers?" Flint looked at him. "Why would it be wrong?" "Because the breaking happened. That was real. Changing the memory of it doesn't change the fact that it happened." He turned the pot over in his hands. "It's fixed, but the history is gone. I'm not sure that's better." Flint was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is a philosophical question that practitioners of your kind have been arguing about for 2,000 years. I don't have an answer." He paused. "But I think the fact that you're asking it puts you considerably ahead of the people who don't." Harry set the pot down and went back to his water. "Mira," he said, to the room generally, because Mira was usually somewhere in the room. "Here," she said from the corner. "What's Dumbledore doing? Has Amelia heard anything?" "Not from Amelia directly," Mira said. "But Ragnarok got word this morning that Dumbledore made contact with the Gringotts administrative office. Not with Marchbanks, with a junior registrar. Requesting an informal hearing." Harry looked up. "A hearing? He's doing what you thought he'd do. He wants to come in, to speak, to frame it on his terms before the investigation frames it for him." She paused. Marchbanks declined. "Good," Harry said. She sent a reply saying that informal hearings were not a function of the inquiry committee and that if Dumbledore wished to be heard, he was welcome to surrender himself to DMLE custody and request formal proceedings. Myra's tone was dry. She apparently added a note saying she had been waiting 50 years to write that letter. Harry smiled. "I like Marchbanks." "Everyone reasonable does," Myra said. He was quiet for a moment. "He's going to try to reach me before he goes to the ministry," Harry said. "He's running out of options." The Malfoy letters were the last piece of his political cover. Marchbanks won't give him the hearing he wants. The ICW is watching. The only card he has left is me, trying to convince me personally. He thought about what Ragnarok had said about Dumbledore's persuasiveness, the genuine intelligence and apparent care. "He'll make it about my mother." Neither Mira nor Flint said anything, because there wasn't anything to say to that. They both knew he was right. He came on a Sunday evening. Not in person, not yet. A letter, delivered by a phoenix, which was the kind of ostentatious gesture that announced itself before you'd opened the envelope. The phoenix, a flame-colored bird that appeared in the sitting-room window and set nothing on fire, as though it knew it was being watched, deposited a cream envelope on Harry's table and left with the self-important dignity of a creature that knew it was being used as punctuation. Harry looked at the envelope for a long moment before he picked it up. He looked at it the way Flint had taught him to look at objects with magical history, reaching with the structural sense, feeling the surface of it. It was clean. No hexes, no charms, no magical manipulation. Just paper and ink and an old man's handwriting. He opened it. The letter was long. 4 pages, small hand, dense and careful. It began with his mother's name. "Dear Harry, you will, I hope, forgive an old man for choosing this particular method of correspondence. I have always found the phoenix a creature of honest intent, and I wished my first words to you to arrive in honest company. Your mother was one of the finest students I ever taught. She was also one of the finest human beings I have known. There is much I could say about Lily Evans, but what I wish to say first is this: everything I did, I believed I was doing in her memory and in service of the world she wanted to exist. I know that is not sufficient justification. I am old enough to know that it is not sufficient. But I want you to understand the shape of my error before you judge its magnitude, because I think you are the kind of person who would rather understand than simply condemn." Harry read the full letter. He read it twice, slowly, with the attention he gave to everything. It was, as Ragnarok had warned, extremely good. It was intelligent and careful, and it did exactly what he'd anticipated. It made its case through apparent honesty, acknowledging wrongdoing in a way that reframed it as the error of a man who had tried too hard rather than one who had taken too much. It was personal in the ways that were most effective. It invoked his mother throughout, not exploitatively, but with what read as genuine grief. It was the kind of letter that a person much less careful than Harry might have found moving enough to be persuasive. Harry sat with it for a while. He let himself feel what it wanted him to feel, because ignoring the feeling wasn't useful, and he knew that. He let himself feel the grief for his mother that the letter pointed at, the complicated ache of someone described by someone who'd known them and whom you'd never meet. He let himself feel it and then he set it aside, because the grief for his mother and the question of what Dumbledore had done were two separate things, and conflating them was exactly what the letter wanted. Then he wrote back. His reply was 1 page. It took him 40 minutes, partly because he wanted to be accurate and partly because he was choosing his words with the care of someone who understood that this letter would eventually be read by people other than Dumbledore. "Dear Professor Dumbledore, I read your letter carefully. I believe you are sincere in the way you describe. I think you genuinely believed you were protecting me and protecting Britain. I also think that sincerity and good intention do not change what happened. 3,100 families lost things that were theirs. A 6-year-old child was placed in an unsafe home with a deliberate magical suppression on his core, which means I spent 5 years less than I should have been. Neville Longbottom's parents are in St. Mungo's and the money that should have been his is gone. Edmund Fenwick died and his money moved anyway. These are not outcomes that can be reframed as the consequences of loving too much or trying too hard. They are the consequences of deciding that you knew better than everyone else what the right thing was, and acting on that decision without consent and without accountability. I don't want to condemn you. Condemnation is not what I'm interested in. What I'm interested in is restoration, returning what was taken to the people it was taken from, making certain the institutions that allowed this to happen cannot allow it again, and making sure that the people who were harmed are heard and believed. If you want to help with those things, you know where to find Amelia Bones. Harry Potter. He sealed it and gave it to the same phoenix, which had apparently waited on the windowsill, looking scenically orange. It took the letter with the regal unconcern of a creature that had been delivering correspondence for 100 years and would be delivering it for 100 more. Then Harry went to find Mira to tell her what had happened. She was in her office on the sub-level, doing paperwork that would never entirely end. She looked up when he came in and read his face. "He wrote to you," she said. "I wrote back," he said. He sat down across from her and described both letters accurately, including the parts of Dumbledore's that had been effective. Mira listened without interrupting. When he finished she was quiet for a moment. "Amelia needs to see your reply before the Phoenix delivers it," she said. "I know. I wanted to tell you first." He looked at her. "Was it right? What I said?" "Yes," she said. "Exactly right. I wasn't cruel," he said. It was important to him. He'd thought about it carefully. "No," she agreed. "You weren't." She picked up her quill. "But you also didn't pretend." "No," he said. "I didn't do that either." She nodded and started writing, Amelia's notification, fast and precise. Harry sat across from her in the small, warm office and looked at the ceiling. He thought about the pot. The clay that didn't remember being broken. He thought about Dumbledore's letter, and his own reply, and the difference between healing and erasure. Between changing the memory of something and changing the thing itself. He was going to see Dumbledore. He knew that. It was coming, the man wasn't done, this letter was the opening of something, not the close of it. Whatever came next was going to require everything he'd learned in these 3 weeks and more. He didn't feel afraid. He felt ready. Not because he was certain of the outcome, but because being ready didn't mean being certain. It meant knowing where you stood and why. He stood on honest ground. That was enough. "Mira," he said. She said, writing. "After this is over. After all of it." He paused. "Do you think they'll let me stay here? At Gringotts?" She stopped writing. She looked at him. "I mean, I know eventually I'll need to go somewhere. A real home. But I don't want to lose," he stopped, searching for words, which was unusual for him. "I don't want to lose this. What we built here. You and Ragnarok and the tutors. I don't want to go back to being managed." She set down her quill. "Harry," she said, carefully. "You are not going to go back to being managed. That is the one outcome I can promise you with absolute certainty." She paused. "Whatever home you end up in, whatever the next part looks like, you've changed too much for anyone to manage you now." He thought about it. "Is that a good thing? For you?" "Entirely." She picked her quill back up. "For anyone who tries to put you back in a box. Considerably less so." He considered that. "Good," he said, and meant it. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. Dumbledore came on a Wednesday morning, 4 weeks and 2 days after Mira Goldthorne had knocked on the door of number 4, Privet Drive. He didn't announce himself. He didn't use the main entrance on Diagon Alley or the service door on Nocturne Alley or any of the official channels that Gringotts had available for visitor registration. He simply appeared in the corridor outside Harry's rooms at 7:15 in the morning, which was, as Ragnarok noted later, with the flatness of someone cataloging an insult, an act of deliberate trespass that demonstrated precisely what kind of man he was. The wards caught him. Of course they did. Gringotts wards were the most sophisticated in Britain and had been built over 9 centuries by people who understood that security was not a feature, it was a philosophy, and they didn't just stop him, they held him, suspended in a gentle, implacable stasis at the end of the corridor, and then every alarm in that section of the bank sounded simultaneously and 6 goblins were there in 40 seconds. Harry heard the alarms from inside his rooms. He was at the table with breakfast and Voss's notes on structural magic history and the particular quality of early morning that he'd come to love about the underground rooms, the way the enchanted window showed the Scottish Highlands going gold in the dawn, the way the bank around him hummed with its own deep mechanical life. He put down his toast and listened. The alarms stopped. A moment later, Ragnock knocked, which he'd never done before, and opened the door. "He's here," Harry said. "In the east corridor," Ragnock confirmed. "Held by the wards." He made no attempt to free himself, which suggests he intended to be caught. Harry looked at his breakfast. He looked at the window. He thought about the letter he'd sent 3 days ago and the silence that had followed it and the way the silence had felt like something gathering itself. "Where do you want to do this?" Mira asked from the doorway behind Ragnock. She'd clearly been woken by the alarm, she'd pulled robes on over what were obviously sleeping clothes and her hair was down and she looked, in this particular moment, more like a person and less like a professional, which made her seem more solid somehow. More real. Harry thought about the various rooms he'd been in over the past month. The inheritance testing suite with its midnight ceiling. The formal negotiation room where he'd met the Malfoys. The conference room where Augusta Longbottom had given him permission to use her family's name. "Here," he said. "My rooms." Ragnock looked at him. "Because they're mine," Harry said. "I don't want to meet him somewhere that belongs to the bank or the ministry or anyone else. I want to meet him somewhere that's mine." He paused. "And I want him to have to come in and sit in a chair I choose and look at a window I changed, because I want it to be absolutely clear to both of us that this is a conversation he's having on my terms." Ragnock said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "I'll have the ward released." They brought Dumbledore through the east corridor and into the sitting room, and Harry stood in the middle of it and watched him come in. He had expected, he wasn't sure what he'd expected. Diminishment, maybe, the way people sometimes looked smaller in person than they did in your imagination. Or the opposite, the magnetic gravity of someone who'd spent 70 years being the most important person in every room. Albus Dumbledore was both and neither. He was old, genuinely, profoundly old, in the way that made his age present in the room with him, a physical quality as much as a visual one. He was tall and thin and his silver hair and beard were as advertised, and his eyes were the particular shade of blue that photographs couldn't quite catch. He was wearing plain traveling robes, no ceremony, no half-moon spectacles, he'd left those somewhere, which might have been calculated or might have been that he'd not had time for them. He looked at Harry. And Harry looked at him, and felt, not what the letter had tried to make him feel, which was the complicated grief of something lost before he could know it. He felt instead something steady and clear, the anchor he'd learned to find in the practice sessions, his magic sitting still in his chest like a coal in a hearth, and behind it the truth of the last month, the 47 pages of names, Neville trying not to cry, Molly Weasley's letter, Narcissa giving him documents that cost her something real, Mira and her endless tea and her honest answers, Voss and his timeline and his mother's line of thinking. All of it was there, solid and factual and his. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and his voice was, it was what Ragnock had described. Warm and specific in making you feel, in the sound of it, that it knew you. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. "Sit down." Something moved through Dumbledore's expression. Not offense, which Harry had half expected. Something more like recognition, the look of someone who has anticipated a thing and found the reality still carries weight. He sat in the chair Harry had placed, not the comfortable one, not the one that faced the enchanted window, but the plain one at the far side of the table, the one you sat in when you were the person being examined. Harry sat across from him. Mira was in the corner. Ragnock stood at the door. Amelia Bones stood beside Ragnarok with her credentials and a recording charm already running. She'd been there since 6:30. Harry had asked her to come personally, not because he needed protection, but because whatever Dumbledore said in this room needed to be on official record. Dumbledore looked at Amelia, at the recording charm, and then back at Harry with an expression that recalibrated very slightly. "You've prepared carefully," he said. "I've been preparing for 4 weeks," Harry said. "Not for this specifically. Just in general." He looked at Dumbledore steadily. "You read my letter." "I did. Did you agree with it?" A pause. Dumbledore looked at his own hands, which were folded on the table, and then back up. "I found it difficult to disagree with," he said. "You were accurate. Then what are you here to say that isn't in the letter?" "I'm here," Dumbledore said, "because letters don't allow for apology." Harry waited. "I came here without surrender documents or legal counsel," Dumbledore continued, "because I wanted to speak with you first. Not to negotiate, I understand that ship has sailed. Not to persuade you toward leniency, I don't believe that's something I have the right to ask. I came because you are Lily's son and James's son, and whatever I have done to you, you deserve to hear the truth from me directly. Not through documents or testimony or hearsay." He paused. "If that's something you're willing to hear." Harry looked at him. "You have until I decide to stop listening," he said. Dumbledore nodded once, accepting the terms. "The night your parents died," he said, "I was not surprised. I knew Voldemort was coming. I knew where he was going. I had intelligence, reliable intelligence, and I chose not to act on it in the way I should have." His voice was even, but there was something underneath it, a geological pressure. "I believed the prophecy. I believed you were the only one who could end him, and that your death, or his, was the fulcrum everything turned on. I told myself that the blood wards on Petunia's house, the protection they would generate, would keep you safe. I told myself that keeping you away from the wizarding world until the right time was protective. But it was also convenient," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. "Because a child who grows up in the wizarding world has relationships and knowledge and a sense of his own history. A child who grows up in a cupboard under the stairs, comes to Hogwarts grateful and unformed and easier to direct," Dumbledore said, and he said it with the precise, unflinching weight of someone who had spent a long time deciding to say the truth of a thing. The room was very still. Harry looked at him. "You knew about the cupboard." "I suspected. I did not look." He held Harry's gaze without flinching. "That is the most shameful thing I have to tell you. Not the financial scheme, that was wrong, deeply wrong, and I will own it completely. But the cupboard. The malnutrition. The broken fingers. I suspected, and I told myself it was a manageable cost, and I did not look." He paused. "There is no explanation for that is not simply an exhibition of how far I had gone in convincing myself that my strategy was worth any price." Harry was quiet. "The financial scheme," Dumbledore continued, "began as wartime necessity. I needed resources that didn't pass through ministry channels. The ministry was compromised, there were Death Eater infiltrations at every level. Creating proxy trust structures was a practical solution to a real problem. After the war," he stopped. "After the war, I told myself I would correct it. That it was temporary. That once things stabilized I would ensure every family received what was theirs." He looked at his hands. "I waited. And then waiting became a habit, and the habit became easier to maintain than to break. I am not excusing it. I am describing how a person gets from a wartime decision to a 5-year theft without ever deciding to be a thief." "But you knew," Harry said. "I knew. The whole time." "Yes. And the suppression ward on the house." Dumbledore's expression shifted. "I believed it was protective," he said. "A child with a magical signature as strong as yours, in a Muggle household, with no guidance, the risk of accidental magic detection, of ministry intervention, of exposure was real. I told myself, you suppressed my magic for 5 years, Harry said, to protect your strategy. He didn't say it with anger. He said it the way Flint had taught him to say things in the practice sessions, clearly, accurately, with the temperature held down and the meaning allowed to do its own work. Dumbledore looked at him. Yes, he said, quietly. That is the honest version. I'm 5 years behind, Harry said. Not in Hogwarts curriculum, I don't care about that. In myself. In what I should have been developing, what I should have been learning, how I should have been growing. 5 years of that was taken. He paused. Not by accident. By design. Dumbledore said nothing. I want you to understand that, Harry said. Not because I want you to feel a specific thing. But because in your letter and in what you've said this morning you keep framing the harm as a side effect of something you were trying to do for good reasons. And I need you to understand that from where I was standing, it wasn't a side effect. It was the whole thing. He stopped. He'd said what he came to say. He sat with it and let it be in the room. Dumbledore, to his credit, didn't fill the silence immediately. He sat with it too, and his face did something complicated and private and real. I understand, he said, finally. Good, Harry said. Amelia Bones had been extraordinarily still throughout the exchange, with the professional composure of someone who understood that her presence in this room was a function of her role and that inserting herself would only reduce what the conversation could do. But when Dumbledore looked at her, finally, she was ready. Albus Dumbledore, she said. I'm placing you under ministry arrest pending formal charging on the following counts. She didn't consult notes. She'd been carrying this list for a long time. Financial misappropriation of 3,112 separate inheritance accounts. Fraudulent establishment of proxy trust structures. Deliberate and unauthorized application of a magical suppression ward to a minor beneficiary. Placement of said minor in an unsafe living situation without a formal guardianship filing or Wisengamot approval. And, she paused, and her voice did something that was precisely calibrated, conduct prejudicial to the safety of a magical minor, under the child protection provisions of the Wizarding Child Welfare Act of 1950. Dumbledore held her gaze. I won't resist, he said. I know you won't, she said. You didn't come here to run. No. He looked at Harry one more time. May I ask, what will you do now? When this is over. Harry looked at him. Keep going, he said. Learn. Build things. He paused. Undo some of what was done, where it can be undone. Make sure the families have what they're owed. And after that? After that, when I'm 11, I'll go to Hogwarts, Harry said. And I'll be a student, not a symbol. And if anyone tries to make me into one, I'll correct them. Dumbledore made a sound, brief, quiet, that had sadness in it and something else, something that might have been, despite everything, admiration. You're very like her, he said. Your mother. She had that same quality, the ability to see the thing clearly and say it without cruelty. I know, Harry said. I'm working on having her understanding of structure too. Voss says I have her line of thinking. Dumbledore looked at him. Aldrich Voss. He's one of my tutors. He was one of the finest theoretical minds I encountered in 40 years at Hogwarts. He paused. He refused to teach there. He felt the curriculum was too restrictive. He's not wrong, Harry said. A ghost of something crossed Dumbledore's face. Not quite a smile. The shape of one. No, he said. He wasn't. Amelia stepped forward and placed a hand briefly on Dumbledore's shoulder, the official gesture of custody transfer, and he stood, and the two Aurors who'd been waiting in the corridor came in and flanked him, and Ragnarok stepped aside to let them through. At the door, Dumbledore stopped. The Horcruxes, he said. Amelia stiffened. That is a conversation I need to have with the Auror department, Dumbledore said, calmly, and it is urgent. What Voldemort did to himself to survive, it will be relevant when he returns. And he will return. He looked back at Harry, and for the first time something in his expression was not calculated. It was simply true. I'm sorry I did not prepare you better for that. Tell Amelia everything, Harry said. She'll handle it. Dumbledore looked at him. You're not afraid of it. I'll deal with it when it comes, Harry said. Right now there are 3,112 families I care about. He can wait his turn. Dumbledore left. The room was quiet for a long time after. Mira was the first to move. She went to the kitchen and came back with tea, and she set a cup in front of Harry and sat down across from him, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything because the quality of the quiet was the kind that needed to be respected before it could be broken. Are you all right? She asked. He thought about it honestly, the way he always did. Yes, he said. Not because it was easy. But because, he searched for the word. It was real. He was real. I expected it to feel like something bigger. A confrontation. But it was just a conversation. You kept it a conversation, Mira said. It seemed right. He drank his tea. He'll tell Amelia about the Horcruxes. That's important. Yes. And the charges will go forward. The families will be protected. He looked at the window, it was still showing the Atlantic sunrise, gold and permanent. And he's not running anymore. That was the thing that was left open. He was out there, running, and the families couldn't finish with it because he was still loose in the world. He paused. Now he's not. Ragnarok came back in and sat down with the air of someone completing a task that had been running for a long time. He set his hands on the table and looked at Harry with those dark, absorbing eyes. The Wisengamot will convene in formal session tomorrow, he said. Marchbanks will chair. The full charging documents will be filed this afternoon. He paused. There is also the matter of your formal status. Which matter? Harry said. The guardianship question. Ragnarok looked at him steadily. The inquiry committee passed a resolution this morning, before Dumbledore arrived, establishing that your guardianship arrangement is to be formally reviewed and settled within the week. 3 candidates have been put forward. Harry looked at him. Who? Amelia Bones proposed herself as a formal candidate. She is willing, she has standing, and her professional situation makes it complicated, but not impossible. He paused. Griselda Marchbanks proposed a formal trust arrangement, Gringotts as custodian with a nominated human advocate. That advocate would be Mira Goldthorn. Harry looked at Mira. She was looking at the table with an expression that was carefully neutral in the way of someone who was trying not to influence the outcome of something they cared very much about. The third candidate? Harry asked. Augusta Longbottom, Ragnarok said. Self-nominated. Her letter to the committee was direct. She said, I'm quoting, that she had met you once and found you satisfactory and that satisfactory was a higher bar than most people realized. Harry was quiet for a moment. What do you want? Mira asked, finally looking up. He thought about what he'd said to her the night before, not wanting to go back to being managed. He thought about the month he'd had, what it had built in him, what it had given him that he hadn't had before. He thought about the families and Neville and Molly Weasley's letter and the pot that didn't remember being broken. He thought about the difference between healing and erasure. I want to stay at Gringotts, he said, for now. While things are still in process. Not because I don't want a home, I do. But I have tutors here and work here and the investigation is still running and this is where I need to be. He looked at Mira. And I want you. Not as a guardian on paper. As, what you've already been. He paused. Is that the second option? With modifications, yes, Ragnarok said. We could structure a formal custodial arrangement with Gringotts as the institutional backing and Mira as your nominated advocate and primary carer. You'd maintain your rooms here. The tutors would continue. When the investigation closes and you're ready to transition to a more conventional home arrangement, we review. And when I go to Hogwarts? Harry asked. The arrangement can extend through your schooling years, Ragnarok said. With appropriate adjustments. Many young witches and wizards with unusual situations have had institutional custodial arrangements during their Hogwarts years. It is not unprecedented. Harry looked at Mira. Is that what you want? You don't have to say yes because I asked. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had crossed from professional to personal a long time ago and had been waiting for the question to catch up. Yes, she said. Of course it is. He nodded. Then that's what I want. Ragnarok made a note in his ledger. The formal custody arrangement was filed that afternoon. By evening, the charging documents against Dumbledore were public record. By the following morning, every major wizarding publication in Britain was running the story in full, not the Ministry's version, not a managed narrative, but the actual record, documented and inarguable. The Wisengamot session that Marchbanks chaired lasted 4 hours and produced 2 significant outcomes. The first was the formal recognition of Harry's legal standing as an independent party with full representation rights, which meant, in practical terms, that no one could make decisions about him without his knowledge or consent. The second was the establishment of the Inheritance Restoration Fund, a legally protected structure that guaranteed the return of every redirected inheritance with interest, managed by Gringotts with Wisengamot oversight, outside ministry control. Harry wasn't at the Wisengamot session. He'd given his testimony the previous week and Mira was there as his advocate and Marchbanks did not need him in the room to use the work he'd done. He spent the morning with Flint and the afternoon with Voss, and at 4 o'clock he sat at the table in his rooms and wrote letters. He wrote to Neville Longbottom, not formally, not officially, just one sentence, the fund passed today. It's settled. He wrote to Molly Weasley, I'd like to take you up on the dinner, when things are quieter. Thank you for writing first. He wrote to Augusta Longbottom, thank you for letting me use their names. It mattered. He wrote to Andromeda Tonks, one line, tell Tonks the window can show the Atlantic in the mornings now. He wrote to Narcissa Malfoy, which was the hardest and the most important, you did the right thing. I know it cost you. I think you knew it would and did it anyway, which is the actual definition of doing the right thing. Draco's welcome here whenever you're ready. He sealed all of them and sent them and sat back and looked at the enchanted window. It was evening now, the Atlantic showing deep blue going black, the last of the day's gold fading at the edge of the world. Mira came back from the Wisengamot at 6 with the energy of someone who'd been in a room full of significant decisions for 4 hours and needed food and 20 minutes of not speaking. Harry had arranged dinner, actually arranged it, asked the kitchen himself, set out 2 places. She stopped in the doorway and looked at the table and the food and then at him. Thank you, she said. You've been making tea for a month, he said. It seemed fair. She sat down and they ate and outside the enchanted window the Atlantic went dark. What did Marchbanks say? Harry asked, eventually. She said the session was the most productive use of 4 hours in Wisengamot history, Mira said, drily. Which is her way of being delighted. She also said that the inquiry into ministry oversight of the Hogwarts headmaster position is being expanded, not just Dumbledore's tenure, but the structural question of what kind of accountability exists for someone in that role. She paused. McGonagall has apparently submitted a position paper on the subject herself. Unprompted. I like her already, Harry said. You've never met her. A woman who submits an unsolicited position paper on institutional accountability to a Wisengamot inquiry committee, yes I have, he said. I've met her several times this month. She just has different names. Mira laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that happened when something is funny and the person laughing is also tired enough that the laughter gets in before the filter does. It made Harry smile, which made her laugh more, and for a minute the room was just that, a small boy and a half-goblin healer eating dinner and laughing, underground in a bank, with the Atlantic going dark in the window. The week settled into the month and the month settled into several months, and the investigation ran its course with the grinding, reliable thoroughness of an institution that had decided it owed a debt and was paying it properly. Lucius Malfoy was charged with obstruction and knowledge of financial crime. His solicitors got him a reduced arrangement, cooperation in exchange for reduced charges, which Amelia accepted because the information he provided in cooperation was genuinely useful and because Narcissa had already given them everything critical. He was fined substantially and lost 2 of his 3 ministry appointments. He did not, notably, argue about any of it, which was what happened when someone had been outmaneuvered and knew it. Narcissa went to Andromeda before Lucius found out about the letters. She did it exactly the way Harry had suggested, before necessity, while it was still a choice. Andromeda let her in. Tonks apparently asked approximately 47 questions in the first 10 minutes and then made everyone tea. What happened after that was private, but Narcissa wrote Harry a short note a week later that said only, "You were right. It was better this way." Dumbledore's trial proceeded through proper channels, which was slow and complicated and required Amelia to fight approximately 16 procedural battles to keep it moving and clean. He pled guilty to the financial charges. The child welfare charges went to full hearing, with Myra's clinical documentation as the primary evidence, and they resulted in a formal finding of harm that was the first such finding against a sitting magical official in British wizarding history. He was sentenced to 5 years of supervised restriction, no position of authority over minors, no political role, no access to ministry channels. His vaults remained frozen pending full restoration of all diverted funds. He was alive and free and accountable, which was what the law called for. Harry, when Mira told him the sentence, thought about it for a moment and then said, "The family's getting their money back matters more than what happens to him." "Does it feel like enough?" she asked. He thought about it honestly, the way he always did. "I don't think enough is the right word," he said. "I think it's what's real. And real is more useful than enough." She looked at him for a moment and then nodded, because that was true. On the morning of Harry's 7th birthday, 3 months after he'd arrived at Gringotts, he woke up before the enchanted window had shifted from the night sky it held at 4 in the morning, the Pacific stars, clear and numerous, and lay in bed and thought about the year. He thought about Privet Drive and the narrow strip of shadow behind the shed and the book that belonged to a boy who stood on it to reach the high shelf. He thought about the canvas bag with the too small photograph and the wand that wasn't his. He thought about Mira coming through the kitchen and the transport at the end of the street and the feeling of the thing that wasn't grief and wasn't relief. He thought about Ragnar's flat dark eyes and the word satisfactory and what it meant in goblin terms. He thought about Voss and his timeline and Flint and the pot that didn't remember being broken, and the difference he'd been working out since that afternoon between healing and erasure. He thought about Neville Longbottom trying not to cry. About Tonks's hair going gold. About Molly Weasley writing to a child she'd never met because she had to. He thought about his mother's line of thinking, and the stone that wasn't heavy because it had agreed to be light. He got up and dressed and went to the sitting room and changed the enchanted window to the Atlantic at sunrise. It was something he could do immediately now, without effort, the relationship between the room and the charm settling the moment he asked, and he sat at the table and watched the gold come up over the water. When Mira came in at 7:30 she found a birthday on the table. Not in the sense of a party, he hadn't told anyone about his birthday, not because he was being difficult, but because he genuinely wasn't sure what birthdays were supposed to feel like when you'd been spending your life existing around them rather than in them. But there was the window he'd changed, and breakfast he'd asked the kitchen for, and the letters he'd already sent that morning, to all the people who were, he was coming to understand, the shape of the thing he was building. Mira looked at the table. She looked at the window. She looked at him. "Happy birthday," she said, and she meant it all the way through. "Thank you," he said. "I think this is the first one I've actually had." She sat down and poured tea and looked at the Atlantic going gold and bright. "What do you want?" she asked. "For today." "Not strategically. Not for the investigation or the families or the legal process. Just for today." He thought about it. "I want to do the anchor work," he said, because I've been trying something new and I want to see if it works. And I want to have dinner with you and Ragnar and the tutors, if they're free. And I want to write back to Neville, he wrote last week and I haven't answered yet. He paused. And I want to look at the window. That's it. That's quite a lot, actually, he said. She laughed, and the window showed the sea. He reached with the structural sense, the one that felt like looking at relationships, at the grammar of things, and he touched the charm that made the window and felt the immense, intricate elegance of it. 9 centuries of enchantment, layered and reinforced, built by goblins who understood that the difference between a wall and a window was the relationship between stone and light. He thought about what it would take to change not just the view but the window itself. To make it show not just somewhere else but something true, not a sky over the Pacific or an ocean at sunrise but the actual sky above the bank right now, wherever they were underground, the sky that existed above all the stone and the vaults and the corridors and the morning. It took him 6 minutes. It was the most complex structural work he'd done. At the end of it his hands were steady and his magic was fully anchored and the window showed, directly above, the London sky on a July morning, pale blue and scattered with light cloud, real and ordinary and immediate. Mira stared at it. Is that, she started. Right above us, he said. The actual sky. I changed what the window thinks it is. He looked at it. Not a charm pointing somewhere else. Just a window. She looked at the ordinary London sky going about its morning above them, visible through 60 feet of earth and stone, perfectly clear and factual. That's not in the curriculum, she said. No, he said. I worked it out myself. She looked at him, this small, extraordinary, absolutely unstoppable child sitting at his birthday breakfast under a window he'd opened to the real sky, and she thought about the first morning in his rooms, when he'd eaten porridge slowly because he didn't believe there would be more. She thought about how much distance there was between that morning and this one. Not distance in time. Distance in certainty. In ownership of one's own life. Flint's going to have opinions, she said. Good ones, Harry said confidently. Voss is going to want to document it. He can document it after breakfast. She picked up her tea. He picked up his. Through the window above them, the London sky moved its ordinary clouds from east to west and didn't notice it was being watched, and didn't need to, because it was simply what it was. And Harry Potter, 7 years old, sat at his own table in his own rooms with tea and birthday breakfast and the people who had chosen him, and looked at the sky he'd opened above him, and was exactly, completely, irreversibly himself.